much closer to Earth on the sun near side when the moon is like on the sun far side of Earth, like close to a full moon or beyond a half moon, right? The tides are not allegedly, they are not supposed to be caused by the gravitational pull of the moon.
Okay.
That's not what's allegedly causing the tides. The story goes that the pull of the moon and the sun, the pull of the sun is about as big, the gravitational pull of the sun is about as big as the gravitational pull of the moon, right? As they're about the same size, right? They are just holding that bulge in place. They are not pulling all that water into the bulge. What's pulling the water into that bulge is allegedly the centrifugal force that would act at the equator, right? And that's 100 times bigger than the gravitational pull of the sun or the moon on the Earth.
Mm-hmm. And I've also heard something about a slopping effect, a kind of like as the Earth rotates and the kind of tides hit a landmass or something, there's a slop and it goes back again the other way or something like that. There's something in the slop I remember being taught about in tides. So is it your case then, Shines, that it sounded like something that was crucial to what you were saying is that we can't observe it seemed important?
It's very important. We can't observe even this extending past the moon now, the exosphere. We can't observe the swelling of we're told these things, but we can't observe it.
So how are there other things that we're unable to observe that we can reliably assume to be the case?
I don't know of any.
So like, what about things inside our body where somebody might get like an ultrasound and say, it looks like you're about to have a boy? And we go, well, I can't see that. What I can see is you holding a device against my belly.
Well, no, because I can see what's on the screen. I actually had a boy, and I was able to see that it was a boy.
Okay, so what was the crucial difference then between that ultrasound saying you're about to have a boy? That sounds like you do have would I be right in saying you do have a degree of trust in that, even though you're not able to see it?
I was able to see it. I was able to see his outdoor plumbing, and I know many women who have had babies and were able to see that through the image, and it's correct. I mean, it is very, very rare that a woman is told that this is what it is and you see it on the image and like maybe the outdoor plumbing was hiding and so they say it's a girl, but that's very, very rare that happens. So yeah, that
or
is
in my case,
I trust because I can visually see it.
Or in my case, the outdoor plumbing is so small that you might mistake it for a girl.
There's that as well.
So if I could provide to you some way, I'm not suggesting I've got it. I don't even know how I'd go about it. But if I could show you some similar way where you could, a little bit like an ultrasound, point a device at the moon and from that get a similar visualization on a screen, perhaps that showed the gravitation of the moon, would that satisfy your...
You could physically show the gravitation of the moon, physically. Like you could show the physicality of it.
Well, in the same way that I could show a baby in an ultrasound on a screen. So it might be sort of in black and white and it's somewhat difficult to comprehend, but you go, okay, I can see the shapes. I can see what that's representing there. Would that same, would you accept that same amount of evidence?
I'm not sure that I would. I would be open to see it and see what you're talking about, but that is completely different from seeing a physical object that you can then hold and know for a fact that yes, that's what it is.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm open. I'm always open to see what you got.
Okay.
Can I point something out real quick that I just thought about?
Sure.
In regards to him saying it's the centrifugal force. If that was the case, then the tides would never come back into the beach. If they're constantly being pushed out in a constant revolution, they would constantly be pulling away from the beach. They wouldn't settle back in. Am I wrong? Does that sound logical?
Yeah, well, if all the beaches were at the poles, then you're right. Then there would be like... It's basically... I don't know how the titles. I don't know if. Oh, that's actually an interesting conversation. What are the tides at the poles like? What are the tides at Antarctica like, and what and at the Arctic? Look that up real quick, because according to that, the tides should be really, there should be really small difference between high tide and low tide at the poles. That's pretty much all that's dictated by that.
Well, that's another question. How do we look at the tide of the ocean to areas where we cannot go and see them right now? Because you can't go beyond the 60th parallel to go view it. I'm talking in regards to the South Pole.
You can.
Oh,
you
you know
can make
what?
holiday
Maybe we
there.
could file some paperwork and say we're going to do scientific research. And we want to
No,
go
you
check the
can do
poles out.
tourism there. You can travel beyond the 60th parallel. You might not be able to move freely, but where on Earth can you truly move freely nowadays anymore, right? Everything is covered with regulation.
And this
So
is
let's assume that we can check out these poles
sure.
and go study them. Or let's not assume. Let's assume we do go check them out. And if they are also being pulled, does that take out the entire moon pulling on the ocean equation? Because technically it shouldn't be.
My guess would be it takes a lot to sort of I don't think when science finds something that doesn't agree with previous science, I don't think they just sort of go, right, let's throw it all out. But they make a kind of probabilistic guess where they go, what's the probability that all previous science is wrong and there isn't a moon? And is there another way to make it fit with our current model? But yeah, I would think if we got to a point where we went to the poles and we went, hang on, we see effects that are incompatible with having a single body that revolves, that orbits around us and pulls the Earth, then yeah, we would have to throw out stuff that doesn't work. I would think anyway. I'm not a scientist. I always need to preface that.
Yeah.
Is there something?
I think we should do.
Go on.
No, I was just saying, I think we should do that then.
Yeah, it's an interesting one when I talk to flat earthers because I sort of overestimate myself a bit, but I would imagine if I was a flat earther, I would want to go and attempt to cross the 60th parallel because my understanding is most flat earthers believe that it's not possible to do so. And I think most people have heard the arguments of you can take a cruise, you can take flights. And maybe I'm not understanding and not sort of effectively doing that theory of mind of what would I be like if I was different. But I would have thought I would be like wild horses could not stop me from trying to cross onto Antarctica and either find an ice wall or a pole to answer this once and for all. Is there something, a sort of question for the flat earthers, is there something about it that is like it's better to keep it in the realm of wonder?
I think
you're talking about, first off, you're talking about an expensive proposition, right?
Sure.
So going on a tour to McMurdo or to the alleged South Pole, that's one thing, right? That's fairly straightforward. I think if you have, thousands of dollars, even like $10,000, I think you could do that. But to actually explore, right, that would require quite a larger investment. You're not allowed to take any fuel, right? So the only way you can explore is on foot, basically on foot, or maybe I guess you could have dogs. But according to the Antarctic Treaty, you're not allowed to take any fuel. So it makes it quite challenging. That's my understanding, yes.
Can you I've never seen anything in the Antarctic Treaty about not being allowed to take fuel. Yeah. So do you have anything to back that statement up?
Let me take a look.
Just taking a look here as well. Australia and the Antarctic Treaty. I probably just need to find the Antarctic Treaty itself. Because I would easily believe that there is stuff against, I could easily believe there are quite restrictive controls on you cannot ever run the risk of leaking large amounts of fuel, or something that might end up being sort of functionally prohibitive of bringing fuel.
You're not allowed to mine or
yes,
extract fuel in Antarctica, but that doesn't mean you aren't allowed to have it there.
Yeah, I would be surprised if that, because I would struggle to imagine how people on McMurdo, is it McMurdo, the Murdo?
There's only so much fuel that you can take with you.
Oh, but they're not that we're not talking about the government, right? Like obviously the government is able to fly aircraft and operate, right? I'm talking about private individuals. That's what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Yeah, can you show us something that actually says something about that?
Well, if you've never been there, what are we talking about traversing to? If we've never experienced those temperatures, what are we talking about traversing through?
My stepdad claims he went there, that he was taken on a tour from the tip of South America down to Antarctica, and then slept on Antarctica for one night, and somewhere around his house he's got one of those little things they give away. Fuel, petrol, no. Not finding anything immediately just by doing searches on it.
Does it say about like the negative temperature, like the most cold Antarctica gets?
Incredibly cold. Yeah, I don't mean to suggest that going there would be a simple thing. I think it's just because when I was growing up, I remember a teacher asking me in school, being like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, I want to be an explorer. I want to discover, an undiscovered land. And they were like, oh, bless, all of that's already happened. And I remember being so disappointed that I think some of that's what's prompting my question about this, which is if I could be an explorer, if I could be like, here, I've come back with a chunk of the wall and photographs of it and evidence of it, and that would be like being an explorer. So perhaps that's where my mind's at with it, whereas I'm fairly comfortable at something like this shape.
You know what's funny is that totally reminds me of the Truman Show when they asked him when he was a kid. He's like, I want to explore. Like, oh, there's nowhere else to explore, Truman. So they totally made him they discouraged him.
Yeah. Which is interesting because I've heard flat earthers before saying they feel that the Truman Show is almost a sort of psyops disinformation thing, to go, people are living in a dome in a flat land in a controlled environment where their reality is influenced by powers greater than them. So we made a movie about it so that people would go, that's ridiculous. That's like the movie.
That's called truth in plain sight, right?
Truth in plain sight. Do you think there's a risk of that truth in plain sight being a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, or a circular kind of logic, which is, if I see evidence for the thing I'm looking for, that's the truth. But if I see evidence to the contrary, I call that truth in plain sight.
It's kind of like you can't hide reality if you want to word it better.
Like, they're showing you what's truth, but then mocking it in an entertainment form. So then when someone says, oh, hey, this is real, and they're like, dude, you watch too much movies. That's what movies say. Right. So it just discredits you.
Kind of like poisoning the well, making it seem so ridiculous from the outset that anybody who utters anything similar to it is like, what a...
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I'm aware that there is an application. I'm looking for it right now, and I can't seem to find it. It's a lot of digging through other results.
Sure. So what then would be, like, if we go back to you, Shine, I imagine if we, well, I don't want to speak about your opinion on it. If we showed you something compelling that answered this question about the moon, if I found some way, like the question I was asking before is, if I found some way to show you with the same degree of probability, or that in the same way that they show you an ultrasound, and I pointed it at the sky and said, look at how this works and can show me that, would you trust that?
you're saying that you can prove gravity to me through a photo. I mean, that's what you're saying. You're saying you can see the pull of the moon's gravity, so that implies that you are showing me gravity, that it exists. Yeah, if it was like an ultrasound and I could see the child that was growing inside of my body and it was physical, and this has been, like, you can actually see it, hold it, touch it, feel it, like, you know what I mean? Like, there would be a lot within this machine that would have to, it would be a lot. And I would need it, you know, thoroughly explained. So if you can do that, I'm more than willing to listen. But I would have to take it one step at a time and then break everything down. I'm not going to say I would just blindly trust it like an ultrasound.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good standard to hold, to go, sure, I'll consider it, but I'm not going to sort of throw away my whole worldview because you showed me a picture of something. Do you think there's any level of proof that you could get to where you would be willing to go like...
Presentation, 2 balls circling each other in a vacuum, water on the outside of a ball in a vacuum, a tide on a ball in a vacuum. Anything they say works or happens in reality, any type of presentation with a spherical object in a classroom setting anyone can do. We'll take one.
So I think you can imagine what might be the difficulty for that according to the...
No, he can't.
No, not at all.
He's been saying that for months or years.
I've been saying it for about 8 years.
So what are we claiming?
Listen, the thing you're backing through is particles. What shape are they told to be?
Particles?
What shape are electrons told to be?
Particles do not have structure, Demo.
Hey, I'm not talking to you at all.
I know they're not typically drawn as spherical, but I have...
If you don't mind.
Particles are points in space. They don't have a structure.
If you don't mind, I wasn't talking to you, Narnia. I'm talking about real stuff. Real particles, real electrons.
Narnia wasn't talking. You know, I was talking about real stuff as well.
You are Narnia. Now listen.
No, I'm not.
What? Okay, draw a particle. Draw an electron.
Again, particles don't have a structure.
Explained to me in my classroom.
Yeah,
they were explained as spheres, right? Neutrons, protons, electrons. So now you're telling me that I got to have some kind of crazy ass scale that's big to show a sphere, but then everything on the smallest scale ever known to man is a sphere
No.
So how in the hell
they were claimed to be points? They were points.
So is that
not spheres? They were points.
So what, electrons have sort of no width or depth or anything to them? They're just a point.
I don't think they're spheres at all. But they'll have you draw the card.
I gotta be honest,
electrons are not spheres.
Anything about electrons. I would be.
Electrons are quantum fluctuation waves.
You're not the only one. No one does. Because if they do, tell them to draw one right now and then show us it work.
So would showing it works be a important thing for you to accept something as the case, Demok?
Definitely. If you can show a ball with water on the outside or tides working on a ball in or out of a vacuum in any lab setting or scientific setting, sure, we can all touch and every kid can go to the field trip. Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Could it be that there are some things that might be the case, might be
not at all
accurate, that don't make sense to us?
Not at all.
So everything that exists...
That's called the realm of Narnia. Listen, if you have extraordinary claims, they're the only things that require extraordinary fucking explanations. Regular stuff like a ground not moving, no gravity needed, no stupidity, no Narnia, no dumb stories. The earth is flat, water's level, seeks its thing, high to low, hot to cold.
Cool.
Simple.
All right. Let's go on with the sort of...
And I can repeat everything on a flat surface, see? There is
just
no
hold
globe.
up a second, Demok, because otherwise this becomes a bit of a gish gallop and we're talking about sort of lots of stuff. The question I'm at is, could it be the case, could it be that something is the case and incomprehensible to you as an individual or to us as humans, but it still be true? Or does it need to be comprehensible to be true? Do you get my question?
It was kind of incomprehensible.
You're saying
does this question have to be comprehensible to exist?
You're trying.
So I guess it
stuff being scaled down.
So like one example I'm thinking of is and I don't know if this has actually been solved yet, but like if you look at giant trees like the redwood tree, there is, at least my understanding, there was for a while, possibly not anymore, there was for a while it was considered a total impossibility to be able to pump water that high, where they were like, how on earth can you get water up to the top branches in this tree?
Temperature.
Could it be the case that water does get to the top of the tree? Is this on this point, Demek?
Electricity.
Is this on this point about trees?
Yes. Yes, most definitely. The chlorophyll on the inside is liquid, sir. That tree has a circulatory system. It has to pump and pull and push, compress and decompress the liquid just like we do.
Sure.
In our veins. Hydraulics.
So I find that
why would it be incomprehensible? So why would that be incomprehensible?
Electricity allows.
Sure, it doesn't have to be.
That's
with
what I mean.
It doesn't.
Is it because of the globe model that it was incomprehensible? Like, why would that be incomprehensible for the water to get to the top of the tree?
That's exactly my point. I think it might be the case that some things could be true whether or not they are easy to comprehend, whether or not it is possible to comprehend them. Certainly, some of the things that I've heard about with
doesn't exist. Is that possible to comprehend that gravity is not real at all and never existed and was never needed because the tree doesn't have any problem with the water going against gravity. Nothing does. The carbonation of my soda, nothing. Helium, nothing. Air balloons in water, nothing has a problem going up, pal. Nothing. There's no such thing.
Nothing has a problem going up? I have a problem going up. I need to get in an aircraft to do so.
Well, there you go. Welcome to Flat Earth. It didn't have nothing to do with gravity getting you up there, did it?
Well, it was gravity that required the aircraft, wasn't it?
Coming back down. It has to do with the airplane you got in. The airplane took you up. What brought you down, son? The damn airplane, not gravity, bro. Check it out. And the medium around you. Okay. Resistance, brother.
All right.
You don't climb.
I've got to
gravity,
admit, Demok, we chat a lot, but I don't always follow what you're saying, and I always end up with a
is the air
bit of doubt that you follow what I'm saying. Mostly because when I'm still speaking, you start.
That hasn't been proven at all. You're talking about Narnia. Show a globe, do what you claim. Okay. Show a sphere in front of us right now.
Sorry, that's enough of Demok for a moment. I hate to use a server mute thing, but Demok, you get to a point where you just keep repeating yourself, and it doesn't advance the conversation at all. So the point being, we want to understand: is gravity? Does gravity exist? Does it pull from the moon on Earth? I think most globers here, maybe Chike and Morty could speak up on this. I think being somebody who thinks that the globe is more probable than a flat Earth, would say I would really struggle to explain or describe gravity, or certainly I would be failed to prove it. If all of the world's scientists have failed to prove gravity, I certainly wouldn't be able to. So where does that leave us, I guess, is the question.
Well, don't you find that odd that that's the one thing you need, like desperately need, for your model, and nobody can explain it or prove it? Like, that's a problem, and I think it needs to be addressed.
Sure. Explain it. I've heard some explanations. So I'm not, I mean, as an individual, but the closest I can get is what I've heard other people saying, which is mass attracts mass. And that to me would satisfy me as a relatively simple explanation. How it works at grand scales on continents versus water is where I might struggle to explain it. But if I could explain it as mass attracts mass, and then we could do experiments on that, would that satisfy you, Shine? What would be the burden of proof that
that sounds quite funny as well, because if mass attracts mass, then why aren't all the masses attracting to each other? Why are they spinning around each other and not all pulling in? Like, it just falls apart at every single step of the way.
At what point does it fall apart?
I just said we can start there. That all the planets, everything that is supposedly in the universe, is not attracted to each other. It's expanding, they even say. So, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it falls apart. It attracts some things. It doesn't attract other things. It attracts some things that are heavier. It attracts some things that are lighter. Like, it doesn't make any
Shines,
sense.
every single example of the that you pointed out, every single specific example that you pointed out where this does not seem to be the case has been explained, has been shown to be a misunderstanding. Where do you take your security from that you your understanding of this is proper.
Okay, then why don't you explain how I'm totally misinformed, please?
Again, in the vague allegations that you're making, that's not possible. But whenever you pointing out anything with any specificity, it has been explained to be fallacious.
And I am asking you then to explain how I am being fallacious. You're just saying I'm wrong and that I don't understand, but you're not explaining it.
Well, okay, then specify, then substantiate your claim that it falls apart. What contradicts it?
Let's just start with something very simple. If mass attracts mass, then why are not all the planets and everything colliding with each other because they attract each other? Just like with the
already
quote unquote experiment.
That's literally how a planet is defined. That
and
this
so now
already
they just
happened.
are separating because gravity is still here in your model, so it should be pulling everything together with mass attracting mass.
Could I have could I have a go at explaining? Oh, sorry, you go, Morty. I didn't mean to step in there.
Okay, so planets are literally defined as one of the criteria for a planet is that their orbit is free of relatively free of other stuff, so that they are not constantly colliding with anything. That's one of the requirements for something to be classed as a planet. Okay, so why are they not colliding with? Why are things not colliding with each other? Because that already happened. If that was still happening, then we wouldn't be alive, right?
Exactly.
According to the narrative, there would be like a hail of stones, and there would be like the pure amount of energy that this would theoretically, the kinetic energy that would be released in those collisions, theoretically, would heat up any sort of accumulation of rocks to the point of melting them. Like that's what should, according to what we know about energy and how stones behave, what should happen. So if that was still happening in our solar system.
So it sounds like what you're saying, Marty, is in order for it to be a planet, it's already done exactly what Shines is asking, which is it has pulled in and collided with lots of other things and sort of coalesced into something spherical, which has cleaned up its own orbit, so there's very little for it to run into anymore. Is that the gist?
Correct. And this extends to our scales as well. This extends to the Andromeda galaxy is allegedly in the process of colliding with the Milky Way, and all of this is being attracted to a bigger attractor. Like things are colliding with each other. That's the story. That's not the story is not that this is not happening and it's only happening on Earth to hold us on Earth somehow magically or anything. It actually is cohesive and coherent throughout.
Yeah, it seems like it makes a lot of sense to me, but what I would also agree with what I think you're saying, Shines, is, and correct me if this is not what you're saying, but the scales are massive and in many parts it seems counterintuitive. So to my sort of, how would I put it? My intuition makes it feel like that's ridiculous. Would that be close to how you might describe it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is very ridiculous. It goes against, it just goes against it. It's contradictive.
In which bits is contradictory?
Across the board. That so everything has already collided. Now everything is expanding, but it's still colliding. But we're so perfect that nothing's colliding right now. It'll only be, when nobody's around to see it. And like it goes on and on, down to the medium, down to water, down to land. As far out as far in. It doesn't cooperate.
So and so it's important that this. I guess, and this might have been the point that Denmark was making before, because it's such a big claim that it's making claims about stuff that we're not even able to touch or over in other star systems, and describe stuff that happened billions of years before we're here. Because it's such grand claims, you would want a significant amount of evidence for it, evidence you could touch or see or hold.
Like a little bit of evidence, just a tad of evidence, and I don't see any evidence whatsoever.
Would it be that you don't? Because I feel like you've asked a great question there. If mass attracts mass, why aren't they all colliding? And then I feel Morty gave a pretty good answer to say essentially they are, but at the time scales we talk about, it's just not happening every other Wednesday, because our according to the heliocentric model, our existence is like a blink in a eon of nothingness, and most of that's happened.
That's very convenient. It's very convenient that everything that lines up with the stories are just stories that we can't corroborate.
Well,
we can't see. We won't ever be around to see it. We weren't here to see it. Is it
convenient? Like if that's the whole span of time, and we're suggesting, hey, we are sitting here, and that's all we take up, and this is 13 billion years. Wouldn't it be not seeing much? Wouldn't that be a probability? Wouldn't it be a little bit like saying, oh,
No, we'd see it everywhere in the universe around us. We'd see all this happening everywhere, every day. We'd see evidence of this bullshit that's supposed to be real. If we see stuff and it's supposed to go from the center, right? Like you have two masses, one's more dense. It's supposed to go to the center of the other mass object and end up. So the most dense thing is supposed to end up in the center mass of the center of mass. So if I have a ball of jello and I have a screw, why don't they ever, in a Cavendish experiment or in a vacuum or falling of the ISS or anywhere, can you drop two of these objects and watch one go to the center of the next? Show us that.
Well, because that's not what gravity describes as happening. That would be in a system where the ISS itself would have greater mass than the jello, and the screw would be both would be being pulled on more by the ISS and Earth and the Moon and the Sun than they would be by one another. They would have as much on the other side as they would on either side.
The ISS is in the free fall of space you're failing to recognize. So I've been told by all the people who believe in the globe that this should be doable, that you should be able to do a spacewalk on the ISS while falling around the Earth, throw the ball of jello out. That's what they tell me. You need to contend with them like Zanuck, okay?
I doubt that is the case. I don't find that a probable thing that an informed...
Okay, so what's the point of center of mass then? What does that mean then? When would this ever happen?
The center of mass is...
what does that mean? Where's the center of mass in a ball of jello? When something's more dense than all that jello.
Regardless of what center of mass is,
you got a screw on a ball of jello. Why
my help, anybody's help, it keeps on going, no matter what. It doesn't stop.
The screw on the top of a ball of jello does what now? It's more dense than any part of that jello, and it doesn't end up in the middle. Why?
It's more dense my immediate first glimpse at it would go...
And when you get tired of walking, you need a rest, or you get tired of being awake, you got to sleep. This shit don't stop, man. So for this to continue on and on without needing a rest, that's bullshit, bro.
Without needing
this shit, things break. Things have to stop. Whatever we're on doesn't stop, and nobody's driving either. So that's how you know it's bullshit.
If I were to give this feedback, I want to hear what the flat earthers would say. I feel like sometimes when I'm discussing stuff with flat earthers, we go from one topic to a totally disconnected topic really quickly, more so than when I discuss topics with other people. Would the people present agree that might be the case, or that it's not the case? That we went from...
I agree.
Talking about mass attracts mass to like, why don't things get tired?
Yeah, that always happens. But to bring it back, I did have a question in regards to your mass.
It happens because there's no presentation ever that we can any go by ever. It's all imagination.
This is why we gotta have somebody leading.
I would bring the conversation back to what Chance was talking about.
This is why we gotta have people like strongly leading a conversation. Otherwise, it's going to usually end up like this.
So let me be in charge of the pivot then to go. It sounds like what people are saying is this immediately offends my sensibilities. This idea that mass attracts mass, and I can look at lots of things that I think might be the case if I were to take that mass attracts mass, and if I don't see them, I'm going to doubt their probability.
So I would like to point out something before we forget what this was all about, right? Sure. I would like to point out something, right? So we started talking about the different effects on different scales of mass attracting mass that are allegedly the case, according to the public information, because the case was made or the allegation was made that it falls apart at every step. Like it doesn't match together and it's not a coherent story, right?
Yeah.
And then when we pointed out that the story is actually coherent and that all the claims fall back logically on one another, then it was dismissed as being very convenient that it all matches back together. Like it can't be both very convenient that it all matches back together when you're talking about it in detail and falling apart at every step as soon as you take one look at it. Like,
No, that's exactly what's going on.
It's a good
That
point.
is exactly what's going on.
Like
You are
competition or continua.
Okay, I'm
They
gonna.
call it like specialized, you know.
I don't understand what that Lintomo is saying, so I'm.
So what I was saying is that it is convenient, and that does mean that it is convenient that you have a cool story. It's just like writing a book. You can make the story so eloquent and amazing. That doesn't make it true. That doesn't make it factual. You have to have validation and evidence.
Yeah.
That is what you support your claims. And if you don't have that, it's just a story.
I think
Correct.
both are correct. Like I think these two points. This to me sounds like what Morty's saying. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Morty. He's saying that you've said at one stage it falls apart at every step, and then at the next step you've said it's very convenient. I think both of those in isolation absolutely make sense to me, but in conjunction they are incompatible. It's incompatible to say this doesn't make sense at any level. At every level you look at it, it falls apart, and then to go, after hearing an explanation of how it does work at every level, to go, well, that's very convenient. If it sounds like what Morty's saying is you need to pick one or the other.
Yeah,
no,
correct.
I don't need to pick one or the other. No, I don't need to pick one or the other.
Okay.
Because what he is saying, his claim is, does not make sense. Then the story he says to back up his claim is very convenient, but there is no validation for it. So it's not contradictory. What I'm saying completely makes sense.
Okay.
Does anybody else on the Flutter side understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally get what
I do
she's
also.
saying that, hold on, Marty. Let me talk real quick. You talked a lot.
Yeah.
So what she's saying, just to reiterate, because I totally get what she's saying. She's saying it falls apart, but you're making it not fall apart using a story that's not verifiable. She's saying how convenient for that explanation, but it still doesn't explain it because it's not verifiable. It's just a story.
Could we say,
Okay.
could we go from verifiable to we're not able to verify it? Because I think, because if you don't accept the premise that space is fake, you would go, we can verify it. We go out there and we test it. We send a probe to Jupiter. It's only if we accept your premise that space is fake that then we go, yeah, sure, we're unable to prove anything about space if we accept both space is fake and you cannot determine anything by just looking at it from afar with a something.
Spectrometer.
Go ahead. Sorry, Morty, you've been trying to say something.
Okay, so I
beg the question the other way, though. We have to, we have to accept the claim that things are millions of miles away and billions of light years across. That's the original claim.
Okay, so I would say if something makes sense or not is determined by whether it's subjected to sound reason or not. That means if it's coherent or not, like if it's logically sound, right? Then it would make sense, right? Now the start premise of it can be challenged, of course, and that's where I agree with you, Shines. That's totally fine to say, well, yeah, okay, but what's the evidence for it, right? But that's not the statement that you were making. The statement that you were making was that it falls apart and it doesn't make sense, and that doesn't go together with the statement. Well, it's a very convenient story where everything fits together, right? Well, a very convenient story where everything fits together makes sense. That's why people read books and they can make sense of them, right?
No,
it's just that it's in question if the evidence shown for that is sufficient.
There is no evidence shown.
That's completely fine.
It's not validating it. It's not validating it, though. You have to have validation. He at least brought up something where you can look at something, it'll show you the gravity waves, like, you know what I mean? Something like that. You're just saying, oh, this happened, that happened, this happened, this is what they said, and you should just believe it. And that's why it is the way that it is. And that's why, even though it doesn't make sense, it's happening this way.
Shines, and that's fair enough to say no, that's not a claim to say it that's validated, that the whole story is validated by the fact that it makes sense. That's completely fine, right? But it's not fine to therefore conclude it doesn't make sense.
Who are you, the arbitrary person or arbiter of what makes sense to another human? Exactly. How are you that dude? I didn't think you were God, were you?
That doesn't sound like the point.
So you don't tell me what to think at all. You don't tell me what format to think in, and you don't tell me how to think. So when I say you're wrong because you have no object to prove back your claim of your storybook, all you keep saying is my storybook backs my storybook. My math backs my storybook. Where's the tangible things to back your storybook?
I think that's a great question because that's kind of where I wanted to pivot to next. Where are the claims to back your storybook? So, because I'm curious about what's the I think it's a reasonable question that Shines asks about this, which is let's investigate it at every step. Let's challenge every step. I would even say work to prove or disprove it at any step. Not to prove it, sorry, to disprove it at any step. You cannot prove things in science, but you can show them to not be the case or very unlikely to be the case, and challenge it. And so we need to develop a model to do that. Would people here agree?
No, you need objects to do that.
Sure.
Not a formula. That's where you're still going to be wrong because your formula of imagination can only be
science
by imagination.
Sure. So would you agree that models are useful?
So it leaves us nowhere. We're both 0-0.
Right. Yeah.
We need 1-1. We need to be with material.
Okay.
So
I'm asking a question to get us there, Demok. And the question is, would you agree that models are useful? Could be physical. A physical sort of scale model of something could be a model. A mud map could be a model. A wiring schematic could be a model. Would you agree that models are useful?
Real water and dirt, real objects are more useful than fake stuff. Would you agree?
I don't think I would agree with the characterization that the model is fake.
So you would use
I would say it's a representation.
to be your like a plastic sticker ball for your Earth, but I would use dirt and mud and water. So where are we falling short at here between the two? You want to represent reality, and I want to represent reality. We're going to do it with real materials as a flat earther. You're going to do it with a cartoon story. Where are we falling short here, buddy? You tell me.
I tell you where you're falling short if you'd like, and that is models can help me make predictions that will be decreasingly...
Where's the globe model with real dirt and water?
Demok, please, mate.
There is no model with the lab. That's all I'm trying to stress to you. So you keep talking about these models, but you don't have.
So the question is, are models?
We're waiting to see it. It's been 8 years.
Fuck it, I'm just going to mute you again. You just talk over people. Shines, would you agree that models are useful? If we're like going to buy a house, we want to know the layout of the house. Somebody draws it down on paper, and you go, okay, I get a gist of what will fit in that space. Whether my cars will fit.
It helps people to understand things better, but it
sure.
Like, okay, so if you're making a model of a house and you can see that physical house, then yeah, that's awesome. But when we're talking about models of the Earth, it'll help people to understand things, but that it's not going to be right. Does that make sense?
Not going to be right in what way?
Like, so if you are drawing a piece of paper and you're an architect and you're drawing a model for a house, you can build that house, you can have that physical house. Mm-hmm. We can say that this is the model of the Earth, but we can't truly make a model of the Earth because we're so small on it. Does that make sense? So it's not comparable really, but it will help people to understand.
So because we're so small, we can't make a model of the Earth. Would that be an accurate characterization?
No, you can make a model. That's not what I said. You can make a model, but it's not going to be an accurate representation because it's not going to be the Earth. Otherwise, we'd have to build another Earth model.
Sure. Okay.
So you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm with you now, which is like particularly what I think we'd agree with is if models need to be vastly different to their size. So like when I used to go orienteering, we'd be given a map of like half of New South Wales and it'd be like 1 to 25,000 or something like that. And because there is such a giant disparity between the size of a pen point here would be, a big old circle around me, the greater that distance is, the lower fidelity we're going to get, the less accurate that's going to be. Is that what you're saying about that, Sean?
No, not even necessarily. I'm saying the models can be helpful, but you would have to build an exact replica of Earth if you're going to build a model. You know what I mean? Like it's just going to be on a lower scale because we as humans, even if you build a model airplane, you can build that model airplane and then you can build the bigger airplane and we would still be able to see the whole entire airplane. We're not going to be able to see the whole entire Earth, right? We're not going to be able to see all of what is above us or what's below us in the ocean. So you can't actually make an exact replica of Earth. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying it can be useful,
I'm happy to accept that.
But it's not going to be accurate.
Yeah, I'm happy to accept that. I think you've made a good point there, which is it's going to be useful, but it's not going to be 100% accurate. Would we agree that models are, well, what is the usefulness in models? When you're saying, yeah, it would be useful, what's useful about a model?
Models help you to test things to see if it is accurate. They help you to understand them better visually, so you can conceptualize with it. And yeah, they can help you to predict things as well.
And they help you to predict. Yeah, that's the main place I go. They help you to predict. So, for example, my family have a farm, and if we want to go, we need to fence this area. We made a big exclusion fence recently because, wild dogs and foxes and all sorts of things, pigs, kept crossing over. And so we can get a map, of the farm and go how long from here to here. And there's going to be a bit of squidginess there, right? I don't think we'd ever say I can make a model that's accurate down to, infinitely accurate. I think that's a thing they've also said about mapping, isn't it? How do you say how long a coastline is? The closer you get in, the more fluctuations you're going to get. But we would say it'd be useful because it would help me to, which I'd very much agree with, I'd help me to test and through those tests know how accurately or how much confidence I can have in that model that will help me to predict, for example, how much fencing, chain link fence I'm going to need. So, and it sounds like then when we're talking about the model of gravity and the moon, you're saying when I test it, it falls apart. There's no validation for it. How would you test that? How would you test that model of the moon?
I never said that I tested it.
Okay. So, but yeah, sorry, I didn't know you personally tested it. Sorry, go on, Morty.
I think what Shines was saying, and that's the reason why she says that this all doesn't make sense from the start, is that she regards this whole story as unverifiable. And therefore, the whole story would be unscientific by the common meaning of scientific, which is if a statement is falsifiable or not.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is because a model could be just sort of, I can draw a model of our solar system now where I go, that's our sun and that's us. Now, yeah, that's going to be so in poorly scaled, but I can still do tests about that, right? Can this go in front of or behind the other? So I'm going to be able to make any model's going to help me to do that falsification thing because I can test I can use it to predict, and then that test is the criteria for falsification. Or is it not? Am I missing your point? I think maybe Morty.
No, it's fine.
Because then the next question comes: if we accept that models are useful, would we not want to create a model of the flat Earth? Would we not want to, rather than just tear down one model that does seem to be able to do things like predict the recent eclipse, for example, we want to test it and challenge it on the one hand. Then with that data we're getting, like observations of a distance, a black swan or something, come up with a competing model that would supplant it. And if we don't want to do that, why not?
People have been predicting eclipses for thousands of years. There's an 18-year cycle called the Saros cycle. And those cultures were people that believed in a flat Earth.
Sure.
How did you determine that?
I read that in Wikipedia.
Does it say they thought that the Earth was flat? Or was this
Yes,
the religious?
yes, Marty.
Was this
we
the
had
religious
this.
was this the religion of that culture?
We had I had the same argument with R.C. Meisty. He tried to make the point that where's our proof that these ancient cultures thought the world was flat? And I said my proof is when I go to any flat Earth YouTube video, there's a link to the Wikipedia article about flat Earth where it says flat Earth was an archaic cosmology believed by ancient cultures.
Okay. So the Saros cycle that you mentioned, that's I believe from the Mayan. No, actually, it's originated from the Babylonian culture, right?
How did you teach your mind, Marty, that it wasn't true?
Wasn't true.
Yeah, what he just told you, he just laid out facts that you were denying, and then I'm just wondering how you taught your mind that there's no evidence of ancient cultures believing in a flat Earth cosmology.
I'm not
I
saying
think he's
there's no
challenging that.
evidence. I'm just asking a question because I was about to explain. As I was about to explain, well, that for example, that solar cycle being named, right, originates from the Babylonian culture. And when I go and try to look into the Babylonian culture, I did not find it. I did not find any cues on what they believed the world to be. And I am also struggling to.
Oh, did you read like the myths, like the Epic of Gilgamesh? That's probably where you should start, is actually, reading the mythology. That would help you.
So it sounds like the suggestion is that other people who ancient cultures who were flat earthers were able to build a model, and that model was able to predict eclipses. And by being able to predict it, we can test it by like, does the eclipse occur at the time and in the way specified by the prediction? And that's a useful thing. We're all on the...
Yeah, the Babylonians were such good observers of the sky, right? We still use their system of breaking circles down into 360 degrees, 60 minutes, and 60 seconds. The Babylonians were the ones that came up with that system.
Sure. They built accurate models, would be what we're saying about these two different cultures. Sorry, go on, Morty.
So, one, the solar cycle and similar ancient, similar treasures from ancient cultures have a caveat to them. That is, they were able to detect the cycle for a given location. But for example, solar eclipses, they are location dependent. They are not. They're different for different locations. Those cycles, and they were not able to predict the solar eclipse for one place and the other. They were just able to figure out the cycle for this specific location.
Have you heard of an astrolabe, Morty? Device called an astrolabe. Are you familiar with that?
Not with that word, no.
It's a handheld calculating device that allows you to make astronomical observations based on your location. So you could determine that where the positions of planets, the stars are going to be to your particular location.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel about that, Marty?
No feelings towards it. Didn't fall in love with it.
How did you teach your mind that this device wasn't possible?
Huh?
It's an interesting question. I've heard that the second time. Can you explain that question? How did you teach your mind that something wasn't possible?
Oh, I was just using Marty's line against it. It's always, how did you teach your mind the Earth was flat? So I'm just reverberating it.
Like, it seems, I don't get it. Now I get it. So the thing I want to go to is, it seems that we accept that some flat earthers have built models that have differing degrees of predictive ability, and it seems we agree that that's what models are good for, helping us make predictions and test them. So then the question would be, I've heard a lot of flat earthers say this phrase, and I don't want to lump any of you in with a basket that you don't want to be in, so I want to phrase it differently to how I might have. I've heard other flat earthers say falsification is independent of replacement. And it sounds to me when they're saying that like going, we just disprove your model, we don't present one of our own. And it sounds like
true. You can prove that somebody is lying, and then you don't need to replace it with something else.
Sure, you
don't. If something's wrong, you don't need to replace it.
Absolutely, absolutely. But what we've been saying here, sorry, I use the word but, you're absolutely right. And in certain cases, all I would need to do is go, hey, my client wasn't in the bar when that guy got shot. I don't need to show you exactly where he is. Although I think we'd agree it would be useful if I said he was somewhere else at the time. I agree with you.
It would be useful. And even with, sorry to cut you off, but even in these models, like, so say we say, okay, gravity, well, then what is it? If gravity isn't there, then what is it? It's like, well, can we figure that out? You know what I
Sure.
mean? Like everything doesn't have to have a replacement. If we can say that this isn't valid, that doesn't mean that it has to be automatically everything is known
Right.
on the other end.
Absolutely.
It could take time.
I would absolutely agree with that in the case we're just looking, all we're doing is looking to disprove the globe. If we're accepting that models are useful because they help us predict, I would reasonably assume, I imagine, that therefore it's a good idea to come up with a model regardless of the question of I'm disproving the globe. It's, well, I'm going to be able to predict things. I'm going to be able to predict flight paths and how to navigate from place to place and what I expect to happen with celestial bodies in the sky if I need to navigate by that or something like that. It sounds like what we've agreed here.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you. However, I mean, if the heliocentric model is not what reality poses to be, and we need to have a foundation at which we can start off from. Like,
sure,
if this isn't true, right?
Yeah.
Then why would we want to go as far as to, like, trying to prove what is?
Because it's useful.
Rather than, what's that?
Because it's useful. What we've established is that creating a model is useful.
Can I?
Sorry, I think I trod on the end of Dicelo, and then I'll hand to you, Morty, if that's okay.
I wanted to add something really quick.
Sorry, Righteous, go. Yeah.
If we disprove the globe model and it gets out there more, then more people will be looking into it to give you the FE model you want.
Sure, it's just sorry, I'm stepping on you again. Keep going.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say I was cutting Dicelo off too, so maybe you want to get back to him also.
No, that's fine. I mean, you took the words from me, and that's fine.
So, and I might put that as, if we get it out there, more people will be there to be able to help build the model.
Mm-hmm. And for that, a solid disproof has to be available first, though, right? Like, what's been presented so far, like what's commonly circulating is, most of it is just a mere strawman or misunderstanding. And then there's some cases that are a little more interesting, namely the laser tests, but they are also falling a little short because you can make your life a little easier by reducing the disturbance to a minimum instead of making observations where you maximize the disturbance.
You mean those observations of it at a distance that ballers claim are refraction?
Yeah, like
right.
The laser tests are basically the most interesting ones in that, because those result in surprising distances where you can still see a blinking from a laser over surprisingly low observer laser altitudes. So
I would agree with
that. This is really interesting. But
yeah, I would agree with that. They're the most compelling proof to me. Not proof is the wrong word again. They're most compelling evidence for me of the flat Earth, and that is, lasers or observations at a distance do seem to suggest, if we don't control for other variables, do seem to suggest an Earth that has at least a larger diameter.
How about simple experiments? Like looking at a glass of water. I mean.
Well, that one.
Can I come in for a minute, please?
Say again, sorry, Astro.
I just wanted to come in for about 30 seconds. The way I see and use the models, I use both models at the same time. So for globe effects that I can see and use, I use the globe model, and for flat Earth effects, I use the flat Earth model. It seems to solve everything until I can come up with a model that solves everything. I'm just taking bits and pieces from both models.
Okay. So are they? Would you agree that they are mutually exclusive models? That one model necessarily precludes the accuracy of the other?
No, you can use both models at the same time. If you can't actually solve the problem in your head of why everything works as it does, then I don't see why it's not a problem to take the flat Earth model for some things and the globe for the things that you can not see or sort of like work out for globe effects.
Sure. So it sounds like some of what you're saying is when the flat Earth model works, that's the one I use. there are some places where the globe Earth model describes phenomena I see more effectively. And that's not the words you've used, so I'm paraphrasing. Is that the gist of what you're going with, Astro?
Yeah, that's exactly. Until I can work out exactly what's going on, I'm just taking bits and pieces.
Right. So here, go on.
Interestingly enough, that's what's happening currently, right? There's tons of papers from NASA, from the military, where they're starting out with, well, we're assuming a flat, non-rotating Earth, because frankly, it does not matter for what we're doing here, and it just, having to establish a coordinate system where things curve, where the ground curves, is just more complicated than not doing that.
Yeah, there's going to be a set number of variables. On some days, air pressure and azimuth of the sun and all sorts of things will matter, so we'll go to the labor of calculating them. But for other things, other times it won't, so we don't. The thing I'm getting at with it is, well, to go back to this point, if we get this out there, more people will be available to build a model. The thing I find interesting amongst the flat earthers I've met is that their models are divergent, not convergent. So of the globers I've met, there are people who are just flat wrong, but for the majority of informed people I hear, their models are convergent. There is not people saying the moon is a hologram versus other people saying it's a spherical heavenly body. Almost everybody agrees that it's a spherical heavenly body that orbits around us. So of the few people we have currently creating models, those models are wildly divergent and, largely speaking, mutually exclusive. It is not possible that we live on both a finite plane and an infinite plane, but I know there are infinite planers and there are finite planers. So how do we reconcile the fact that we agree models are helpful because they help us make predictions, and we agree it's useful to have one, to build one for this Earth, while I also still agree with Shine's point that it would be impossible to build one with any kind of accuracy, and it will be difficult, I would say, to build one when we're inside the system we're trying to map. Why would those models still nonetheless be divergent and mutually exclusive? Why are they so different?
I could go right back to you and ask you, is the sun, is it a gas? Is it a plasma? Is it a gaseous plasma? Is space electrically neutral, or is there a electron flow? Like,
sure,
these are questions that are largely taken by cosmologists as being settled, right? If you listen to the mainstream cosmologists, but there's actually quite a bit of controversy amongst these ideas.
Sure, and so, would you agree that controversy regularly pops up? Even popped up back when we were debating geocentrism versus heliocentrism in the Copernican revolution. And yet one side typically wins. Once that gets resolved, one side typically wins, and almost everybody comes over to that side. They go, fine, okay, we rotate around the sun. That there's not still credible astronomers who go, no, I think it's the other way around.
Well, astronomers are still trying to go with the, actually, they're grudgingly starting to come over to the fact that, electricity is an important force in space.
Sure.
And yet, for like the last 100 years, it's been settled science that space is electrically neutral. Like bodies like the sun are electrically neutral. And now, modern observations are proving them wrong at every turn.
Absolutely. That to me is the importance and the value of science, which is we send these theories. My brother's a scientist, and his primary fascination and excitement in life is disproving the work of other scientists, so showing that they were wrong. That's how they get off. That's how they become famous, and that is the way the method works. And that is we try to tear down one another's models and say this model doesn't work because it doesn't make accurate predictions in this area. And often what I think you find is a sort of asymptote towards accuracy, which is we're never going to fully map it, but the errors, generally speaking, become smaller and the problems harder. Whereas
I see the opposite occurs. I see there's a lot of gatekeeping within academic journals.
Sure,
that's so they control who gets published. You're not able to, it's hard to advance as an academic career if you're attacking the ideas that people have basically made their careers on. Right. And I think that another problem that you have is that because you've got this system of people citing the research of other people, right? If 40 years ago someone wrote a paper and they made assertions and those assertions are false, you still find scientists today referring back to that original work.
Yeah.
And how do you go and correct those, mistakes from 40 years ago? It's difficult.
Different. I would agree. I think a hegemony can develop. Yeah, go on. Sorry, Morty.
I want to add two things, both to to what was talked about before, the fact that now begrudgingly or not begrudgingly, that's an evaluation. Scientists are coming around to the fact that maybe the electric force is important on a large scale, contrary to initial belief. That interestingly, that debunks the assertion that's often made from the flat Earth side that there is a hold, that there's an unreasonable clutching to old beliefs, and you won't let them go as a dogma or a premise. Well, this shows no, that's not the case. When something has been wrong, it has been wrong for a very long time, but it's proven to be incorrect, then the story changes, and the public information appears to subject to the new evidence and appears to be superseded.
Yeah, I missed that. That's a really good point, I think, Morty, which is similar to the point you were making before, which is you've got to pick one. You've either got to say there is a hegemony within science that people cannot challenge preconceived notions, and that is incompatible with we've changed our view about the electric force in space. Carry on.
The second thing that Farming Ninja was talking about right now was about how correction, how there is a bias remaining when something has been taught for a very long time. It remains in history, it remains in papers, gets referred back to. So it's hard to get rid of that. That's true. That's a problem. Publishing pressure is also a huge problem in science. So there are a couple of biases that are there, right? But the point that if you are eccentric, or if you are out of the norm and go against what's commonly agreed upon within that community, that you're somehow hampering your career, that cannot be confirmed. There's this Nobel Prize winner in chemistry or biochemistry, and he basically says that a lot of other what's regarded as certain facts, a lot of our facts, he's just denying. He's denying the causality of HIV and AIDS, for example, and other stuff like that. Like, he's known as being eccentric and as going against what others are, what's commonly accepted in this community, and he's still a Nobel Prize winner, and he still has his career. Like, this cannot be confirmed, this pressure to conform.
Marty, the guy that you're referring to is Kerry Mullis, right? I turned you on to that idea. And he's the inventor of the PCR test.
Right.
And interestingly enough, he died just before the COVID outbreak from pneumonia.
Okay. Yeah, well, you're correct. You turned me on to that, and I find it fascinating.
So then I want to kind of steer back to how we got on this topic, which is because, Sofa, I'll call you, pointed this out, that we're kind of getting away from the topic. The topic is about the model. It seems we've accepted it's useful to have it. It seems that some of the discussion we're just having about science is absolutely right as well, which is we build models as scientists, they build models and then test them. And the falsifiability is the key there. Can I test this in a way that it might fail? So why not then have a model that we can test for flat Earth, that we can test and falsify? Is there a value or importance on the counter side of this? We go, well, it's useful to predict. Is there some value on the other side that says, well, on the other hand, this is why we don't, because it might cost us or something? Because I've heard people describing models as a reification fallacy.
I think people have learned the basic debating tactic, right? That don't make claims. And if you avoid
Mhm.
making claims, then you set up the other person to be the one that gets debunked.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that might be some of it. I think that's really well said as well, farming. Yeah, because I certainly, particularly when I first started going into the 24/7 Discord server, I was like, I'm very quickly just learned I'm not going to make claims because then I'm going to have people shout at me, prove it, you can't prove it, this is just a religion you believe in.
Yeah.
And then it's easier to go in and go, well, I'm just going to ask you questions about yours. And I can see that in discussion, in debate. I still want to know where my plane's going, what bearing it wants to take and how much fuel to put on board. How high it's going to need to fly to clear the highest mountain and still fly efficiently through the best sort of air. Too high and it won't be enough to suck into the engines. Too low and there's too much drag. So I can still see there being this real useful model that would be worth billions, trillions potentially for shipping routes and everything. That they might go, well, I don't really care about arguing with Globers, but I do want to make my company more successful, more profitable. So I'm going to... Do you get where I'm going with this, I feel? Yo, do?
I get what you're saying, but I also think that it's... Oh, go ahead, farming.
The WGS 84, right, the map system, the whole global coordinate system is based on is basically flat.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about navigation or whatever, you're using a system that's flat. You're not using a system that's based on curves and all this stuff.
Does the WGS 84 have a container though? Because that's fundamental, my understanding, at least to most people's flat Earth model, is an idea of a container. It doesn't make sense to me by the by, but...
Well, it's just referring to your point of being able to, know how much fuel to put on the plane, right? It doesn't matter whether it's round or whether it's flat. If the map that you use is flat.
Right, so the map itself is flat. Sure, we represent 3D things in 2D. Is the suggestion that the WGS84, the points it maps, map a flat surface? Because I don't think I would agree with that. I think that the WGS84, my little understanding of it is... Go on.
It would be a very strange way to refer to coordinates on a flat surface, right? Latitude and longitude, degrees. When I was in middle school, I never drew a graph and made it latitude and longitude. I always just used X and Y. This was completely fine.
Yeah, everything I'm pulling up here on the screen when I pull up WGS84 is talking about how it maps the roughly spherical nature of the Earth and how it deals with, in some of these, how it deals with the imperfect spherical nature of it. Yeah. It doesn't seem to me to be a flat Earth model. It seems to me that when I talk to flat earthers, most of what they're claiming is that this model is wrong. Because some of what I wonder about this debate is that surprisingly doesn't come up so often is almost 98% of flat earthers are Christian Bible literalists. And that seems to be where the model comes from, because I think most people in here would agree that the Bible is a flat earth book. There are statements within the Bible that, if interpreted literally, only really make sense on a flat plane. And that seems to me to be where the model comes from. And then that seems
I would contend you're 98% figure.
How high, what kind of percentage would you put it at, farming?
Well, and even when you're describing like Christians or creationists, I think these are very vague terms, and I think they cover like a whole host of different worldviews. Mm-hmm. So, like you talked to Catholic traditionalist last week, and his worldview is nothing like, the vast majority of Christians, correct?
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and I wouldn't say everybody's I would agree with that. So let me clarify. I don't mean everybody's got the same.
I think it's more to say like that you could say 98% of flat earthers believe in an intelligent creation, an intelligent design, you know, a creator. I would say 98% of flat earthers believe in that.
Yeah. Okay. So a creator, and I think many would you not agree? Many would. Okay, if we went like many take it from certain passages in the Old Testament, i.e., could be
that's an influence, definitely.
Right. And so some of my thought is about when it comes back to this model thing is, if I take this book to be the inerrant word of God, the earth is flat, and that's the model. And anything that suggests that it is an oblated spheroid is by default wrong, and it is my job to disprove it. But I don't create a model because, well, I think for two reasons. One is because it's very difficult, and most of the observations that we make on the Earth, short of observations at a distance, I think observations at a distance do seem to support something flat Earth, but southern star trails, things disappearing from the bottom first, lots of other things don't make sense on it. And because of that, it's very hard to build a model. So like was it you or somebody else saying before, is like, if we don't want to be debunked on it, we're just not going to make a model.
I did say that. I think that's one of the tendencies that people have.
Yeah. I mean, it's a safe ground to be on. Suddenly getting low mic from you.
Oh, I've been joking around and pointing people to Martin Kenny and his cosmic egg model. And he literally has like a physical model that he's built, you know, kind of based on a bunch of different hodgepodge of ancient cosmologies that he sort of put together.
Right. Pineal Foundation. Oh, these people. What are the pineal gland? They reckon that like touch it, that talks to God or something.
That's where your third eye chakra is.
Right.
I want to go back for a second. Did you say that boats disappearing from the bottom up doesn't fit with the flat Earth model?
It doesn't, to my eye, no. It doesn't seem to make sense. Because
when we can zoom back in on them.
I certainly think that, yeah, that there is an effect that it sort of it appears to be there before we zoom in. I think that also it is the case that when we zoom, the Lake Pontchartrain is a good example. I don't think that power lines. I think that the explanation of perspective doesn't seem to me to answer curve, because at no other scale have I ever seen that.
Well,
we could argue refraction. Refraction would be a thing worth discussing when it comes to Lake Pontchartrain when it eventually comes up. But I've never seen, I looked, when I used to build stuff, I would look down, straight down a plank of wood to see if it was straight. And if it did that, I would go, this is not a straight piece of wood. I wouldn't go, it's pro perspective.
All right. Can I interject?
Sure.
I talked about this last time in Discord in regards to the guy that made a video at Home Depot. And have you ever seen that video where he puts a brick way at the other end?
No.
Okay, so he puts a brick on the ground, and then he has a camera like on the ground as well, like on something that he can move the camera further back. And as it goes further back, of course, we all know that these huge box, retail stores that they create are obviously level from one side to the other, of slab of concrete. They make it as level as possible, correct?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to accept that.
So it's flat. So as he pulls the camera back all the way down to the other side of the aisle, that brick slowly disappears from the bottom up. And when he gets to the other side, he then puts another brick on top of that brick. And then you can see that brick.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't see the first one that he put. And then he moves the camera forward again towards it. And then once again, you can see the brick that's on the bottom come into view. So it definitely is the angle of, of what the camera of the eye is looking at. but because remember, it's on a flat black ground. So if you want to use that in a real life comparison to the Earth, how many miles that the size of the brick compared to that camera, in comparison with that floor, how many miles then can you, like let's say a house?
Sure.
How far do you have to go back on a flat land until that house disappears from the bottom up? And it's just that right there is evidence in itself. I don't think we need to even go further other than that's what optics does. It goes from the bottom up.
So I could accept what I would be absolutely comfortable to accept is like at a great distance, if I was looking sort of away from me here, any kind of bump or fluff or high point on that floor is more likely to occlude, isn't it? Like block my sight to the bottom of an object. So over distance, I would accept that's probably what's going to happen first. Would you expect this thing happening though, where we are seeing what seems to me on there to be a pronounced curve? Because I don't think, short of some weird lens distortion, I've never been into a Bunnings or a Giant store and looked down the lines of shelves and seen them bending like that. The only time I see something bending like that, particularly when I'm looking down it, is if it's bent.
Well, what you're showing there in that picture, I think ballers use that that phenomenon of how things are looming downwards. It's the light distorting it. And I think that's even a baller argument at this point. But that's not to say that is not curving around something going down. It's just, have you ever drove on a long highway, let's say, like, in the desert, and the light poles, they seem to be going down as well, but it's just, again, perspective. But they're all the same height. You're not, you're not seeing the bottom of that one way at the end because that, again, the brick at Home Depot, explanation.
So Apple, what happened with those is the lanterns, they shrink into a point, right?
Yeah, the vanishing point. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So a detail that I missed about the brick in Home Depot. How high was the observer again? How high was the camera?
The camera was literally off the floor. Like,
okay, I want to. Yeah, it was very close to the floor. So there's two things that you were overlooking, right? With that observation. Two more things. Like the first thing was like, okay, any kind of occultation, even if it's very minute, is going to be more pronounced if you have the observer height so small, right? The second is that, according to what you said now, he did not make a sanity check and see if he can zoom that brick back into view from a great distance.
Yeah, exactly. And when you do that, it comes back into distance or into view.
It comes back into view. Yeah, that's not what we observe at the horizon, though.
No, but it is when we have let me say this. When you watch a boat leave the port, and no difference than back when Christopher Columbus was apparently going over the ball and the ship was disappearing, they thought that. But nowadays, you can take a camera, and once the ship disappears over this parent curve, you zoom in and you see it on the water again.
Then it didn't disappear bottom up. Then it got too small to resolve. And it shrank into a point before the bottom starts to disappear.
Yes.
That's something
Don't
else.
overlook.
What we're talking about is where the top part of something is very clearly visible and the bottom part is not. Wait. Zoom in and the bottom part should reappear. That's not what we observe in reality.
Marty, you are overlooking the fact that it's beyond 4 miles gone. It should be behind your geometric curve. So that's not just.
No, I'm not. I'm not overlooking it. I'm not considering it in that point because it's irrelevant to that observation in the first instance.
Yeah, it sounds like
this is moving the goalpost, just like Shines did all the time.
It sounds like what Morty is saying is if the boat is not yet at or beyond that geometric curve, we don't yet need to take it into account. It's a chance that it's just so small that we zoom in and resolve it again. Whereas at other times, so that could explain the effect you're talking about. And then he's saying at other times that won't explain the effect we're talking about, such as things like the sun. I think we've all seen the sun look like that on the horizon, haven't we? Like a perfect semicircle, which isn't what I would expect. Certainly nothing I've ever seen in terms of perspective about a circle getting smaller and smaller. Sure, I would expect it to get closer, but what I tend to see is it staying the same size but crossing over halfway. And to go back to the models thing is the globe model would predict that. The flat Earth model to me would predict a sun getting closer and closer to the horizon, but never actually touching it. Shouldn't ever actually touch it. And if you zoomed in on a sunset, what you should still see is sky or something other than sun between the sun and the horizon.
You can see that.
And it
disappear
to a dot.
Back in on the sunset.
I would like to point something out. Don has a video, because what you're talking about, where the sun is still large looking, but it's going down behind the horizon. That's actually the atmosphere, like it's amplifying the light. And Don has a video where the atmosphere just so happened to allow you to not brighten it, and it is getting smaller and smaller. I don't know if Don's still in here.
No, it's not.
But he could post it. But you can say no, it's not. But it literally shows that. Like you could say no, it's not.
Yeah, the ISO changes in that video. I've seen it many times. Dishonest things.
You can see the sun going away into the medium, and it just like fades away because the medium is so thick. Yes,
which
because
is
it's so thick that you can no longer see it. You can also look at the sunset. Can I get one word in, please?
Yeah, let's let Sean
You can also look at the sunset, and you can see the sun. It looks like it's going over the edge, and then you zoom in, and it reappears. You know what I mean? And you can see the sky underneath it. So there are tons of things where it is from the bottom up there. Okay, you keep interrupting me. I'm done with this conversation.
There
I'm out.
aren't
Have a great
any
night, guys.
such videos.
You're being dishonest, because I'm.
Come on, show them.
Go ahead,
put a video in chat.
No, Chike, that's not productive.
Chat.
No, they say lies. We need to pick them up.
I put a time-lapse video in chat.
Sure,
we weren't talking about the sun originally, right? We were talking about what we observe at the horizon, right? And Apo was pointing out that brick at Home Depot that disappeared, and he could zoom it back into view. And at the horizon, we can definitely make observations where the top part of something is very clearly visible.
That
the bottom
was to
part of it,
explain from disappearing from the bottom up. That's what that was explaining.
The bottom part of it is clearly not visible. There's clearly something missing at the bottom. And when you zoom in, that bottom part does not reappear.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
That's what I've been observing. I've been doing this by hand with binoculars. With binoculars, I can increase my my angular resolution by 10 to 20 times. The bottom part that I clearly cannot see but the top part I can clearly see without binoculars.
What are you looking at?
What are you looking at? The bottom part does not reappear.
And what are you looking at, though?
If this was due to the angle.
What are you looking at, though, through your binoculars?
The easiest to differentiate how much of the bottom part you're seeing and how much of it you appears to be missing is wind farms.
So here's the challenge with the conversation thus far, and it is the globe model doesn't preclude this from happening. The globe model isn't, at least I haven't heard anybody make the claim that this is never how sunsets would happen, where it appears to get smaller and disappear at the horizon. Indeed, I've seen that when I lived in India and live any place where there's a lot of smog. You will see that effect where it gets dimmer and appears to get smaller. And nobody would claim that doesn't happen, that's not possible. That's possible on both models, certainly. What it claims is that this one is not possible on a flat plane. that if that sun is just getting further away, we should only see that sunset. We should never, ever see the sun half over it.
Well, but that's what Shine's pointed out, because you can see a sunset going behind apparently the horizon or the curvature of the earth, but just like she said, but you zoom in and then you see sky underneath the sun again.
Let's test that right now, because I don't imagine it's your position that anything changes except we're making the picture easier to resolve, and it's much easier to do this one I've got on my screen now because it's a enormous picture. I'm zooming in and in and in, and I failed to conceive of a way I could zoom in further on this lower image here, where I'm now going to see sun down there and sky below it, unless there is some other effect I would need to invoke to explain that.
Yes, and what you're looking at is a still photos of catching actual refraction to where the water is higher in optically. It looks like it's raised, just like I put up a video last week as well. You're looking at the shore, 7 miles across, and at certain times of the day when the sun is in a certain place, all of a sudden the water blocks out the entire land and city and houses or whatever retail stores behind it, and then it just disappears. But then as time goes down, then the water comes back down, or the refraction, this optical illusion sets itself back to where it's reality, and there's no longer an illusion. And that's the problem we are dealing. Just like someone said in the chat, the optic observation, it's you can't really contest that because it is distorted one way or another.
So if it's distorted, provable. If it's distorted one way or another, optic observations, as Sofa's saying here, as what part of optic observations are unreliable did you not understand? I could accept that. I would happily accept that. The challenge I would find, if I were in your shoes then, would be to say, if I can invoke refraction, pulling objects and changing their orientation through the bending of light, which I would happily accept. I don't know if it would explain this, but I could for now go, right, I'll grant you that so we can move on. That to me throws out almost every observation I've heard from the flat earth, because of the observations I've heard at the flat earth, almost all of them rely on light moving in straight paths and not bending, and refraction not being a thing. And it seems like whenever refraction's invoked, it's invoked to explain away things that might indicate a curve. Like the key example is the black swan on you've seen the side-by-side photos. Where on one day the crane is bendy and on the next day the crane is not. And here we go. Here's the one I'm looking for.
Yeah, and again,
where I hear flat earthers go, one of those is refraction and the other is not. And I think, fine, that's an absolutely acceptable thing to claim, provided you've shown that you've tested and controlled. Say again?
Do you realize the argument being missed when they talk about the black swan? We're seeing an oil tanker 9 miles, 15 miles, and then way beyond that is a horizon.
Yeah, I'm not confused.
Is a horizon?
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm not confused about that side of the argument. I'm pretty sure I get it, which is how could I possibly see that horizon beyond that thing, which is 3 times longer than as far as I should see on a geometric globe?
Exactly.
In order to know how to answer that question, can I ask you the converse question of how is it I see this horizon in front of both that and that?
It's refraction of that water, the same way the water blocks out the city and the houses that you can see once that refraction is different in the atmosphere.
So it's refraction.
Actually, you can see in that you can see in that pair of photos that rig on the left is squashed and compressed, right? I mean, the one on the right.
The one on the right.
Yes, it's squashed and compressed compared to the one on the left.
Awful photo. Hang on.
Yeah, compared to the one on the left, but when you compare them to close-up pictures, then you will see that the one on the left is actually far less distorted than the one on the right.
But again, we are overlooking the fact.
One on the right.
But again, we're overlooking the fact that we are seeing a horizon about 20 miles out, when technically you have your geometric horizon where the ball is at, and it's at 4 miles.
So let me answer. Well, ask you why the same answer you've given for one phenomena wouldn't be acceptable for the other. If I say to you, why does it appear that the horizon is here? You say it's refraction. Fine, I can accept that. Then you say, well, why is the horizon here? And I say it's refraction, and it sounds like then you go, well, that's not an acceptable answer. Why would it be an acceptable answer in one case and not the other without supporting evidence or argumentation?
What you have to understand is that refraction isn't simply one effect, right? So you can have objects get compressed, you can get objects appear to be taller, you get miraging from the sky reflecting onto the ocean, so that it distorts where the actual horizon is.
Let me put it this way.
So we can get multiple effects from refraction.
Let me put it.
What would tell us which effect we're getting when?
Eggshells, let me put it to you this way.
That's very difficult. You have to make lots of observations.
Sure.
Hold on.
Let's do it.
Let me put it this way, though. Refraction is something we are physically seeing take place, this phenomenon. And then when that refraction drops because the atmosphere is allowing it, and we're seeing way beyond a distance, the stupid part of refraction that gets invoked is they're saying now it's bringing behind the curve of a physical object up into our flat view. That's where it's getting stupid, and that's where I'm like, no.
I certainly would agree. It seems counterintuitive. When I first came to this flat Earth argument a few months back, I was like, when I saw that, I was like, oh. But my very first question is, what's going on with those cranes? Which I know everybody always asks. Why are these cranes bent and these cranes more bent? And if we say it's lots of effects, we would go, yeah, it is. We need to resolve what telltale signs I would look for if I was looking for refraction. If we accept, because it seems we need to be able to accept that refraction could answer either of these. Would you be willing to accept that? Refraction could answer both or neither, but not one or the other?
Yes. No, I say refraction is affecting both of them, and it does in great distances with heat and atmosphere, and the vapor above the ocean immediately. Like, have you ever been on a hot desert road?
Yeah.
And there's a diesel, but it looks like a car because it's crushed and it's all like blurry and all wobbly. That's because heat is making you see this optical illusion.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean it's a ball.
So, right. And we can leave that question to second. I just did that, actually. I went on a trip out into the outback with my girlfriend, and we went along some straightest, flattest, hottest roads I've ever seen. So what are the things we look for when we want to go, is that car really like that or is it not? And I think we would, like, the sense checks I might do are, is that what I expect to see?
Yeah.
So do I expect to see a car that is shimmering, wibbling, or squashed? I go, I've never seen a car that's squashed, so it's probably not. Also, the wibbling are things, and which is, I mean, lots of what I'm going to look for in this hints of refraction are things like that. Are things I expect to be straight, bent, right? So I might see a sign off in the distance, and I might reliably assume that the sign is straight, but I need to probably maintain some doubt that, like, hey, it could have been hit by a car at some stage. It could just straight up be a bent sign. So then it would also maybe be lots of things bent in the same way. And every time I think about what sense check would I do to see refraction, I would say this picture seems to have fewer of those effects. It has the ball where I expect it to be, which I get, that's the whole thing in question, but it also has far straighter cranes. And I don't see that wibbling. There's not much I look at here and go, oh, that doesn't make sense. Whereas
so what you're exactly. But what you're saying or what you're seeing is refraction taking place on the water, but not on the tankers themselves. That's the explanation.
How is that possible?
So are you saying the refractive effect gets to there and then stops?
Well, not that it stops, but on that day, it just so happens that it's not affecting the actual physicality of these platforms so far back.
So
It's just only affecting the water.
Is it your position, if I were to draw on this, that if it weren't for refractive effects, that's where the horizon would be, and that would also be higher?
Yeah. Well, I'm saying the refraction on the first one, right? It's all straight, all cool. Remember, that's 9 miles out.
Yeah,
that's 5 miles past the curve, anyways.
Sure.
And now you have something farther in the distance that looks shrunk compared to the first picture on the left. But again, that is refraction. That is an optical illusion happening. Same thing when you're on a hot desert road and there's the street lamps look weird and all wobbly, but you get close and they're perfectly straight. It was just an illusion.
Sure. It's just that one of the things you said before is it sounds like you're accepting refraction. You're saying refraction could not possibly pull that horizon up. Whereas it sounds like
from behind the ball, yes.
It sounds like what you're saying here is refraction is pulling the horizon down. Why is that okay to assert in one of these that has wibbly cranes, like you're saying about the lights, but not okay to invoke? Like, sorry, I'm drawing my circles the wrong way. Why is that okay to invoke down here in the one that does seem to match our expectations? But then when we go to the, I don't know where I'm pointing. Stop pointing, Harry. In the other one, it's not, because it seems a little bit like it's running with the hares and running with the hounds. Like, I can use an argument when it supports my case, but when it doesn't support my case, that argument is invalid. Which could be the case, but it would just need, what I would want to know is some rationale for deciding when refraction could do that.
You're just seeing different optical effects in both of those pictures.
Sure.
Yes. At different distances.
And the point is that if the geometric horizon should be like a physical thing that blocks how far you can see. And so when you're claiming that you're seeing past it because of a refraction, that's like being able to see on the other side of a hill.
Would that
Are you ever going to be able to see on the other side of a hill?
Yes,
because that's what we're talking
that's
about.
exactly
the
what
ocean is a physical obstruction.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Very easy exercise. If you can see something if the path of light between the observer and the object is not obstructed, right? Now, usually for our immediate surroundings, light travels in straight lines. That's why we can point at things and grab things, why we orientate ourselves so easily, right? Now, when that path is not straight, then and there is an object on a straight line between an observer and there is an obstruction on a straight line between an observer and an object, then that obstruction does not necessarily block the path of light because the path of the light is not on that straight line. That's what could be happening with the horizon.
Okay, so after you said that, it actually reminded me of something that we used to talk about, but we don't really talk about no more. There's this Navy vessel that came out with a technology that shoots a laser at a an enemy, another ship, and it's like up to 120 miles or something like that. Now, once upon a time, someone said, "Oh, that's because the laser is bending over the ball, and then it pinpoints it, and then they shoot the rocket, and it can hit it because the light's bending over the ball." But that is pure La Narnia land right there. That's not Correct. What it is. It's the fact that the laser is hitting something on a flat plane, but it's ridiculous to think that it's going to bring up from behind the ball, from behind its view of the ocean curve. Now we're saying water's curving, which is ridiculous, but it brings it up into view as if it's a flat plane, and then it hits its target. This is the nonsense that we have to deal with in this argument. And I don't know. I just got to shut up because I'm getting frustrated.
Okay, that's correct. It's nonsense. It doesn't work that way. The laser-assisted aiming is not does not have the assist at the same location as the.
Do you understand how those systems work? Okay, if I'm a soldier on a tower and I'm looking down at a house and I hit a laser on it, it's giving me a pinpoint. The rocket will go wherever the laser hits. That's the point of it.
And as you just illustrated, the laser, the aiming assist, and the ammunition, the thing that fires, are not in the same position. They're not in the same location.
But you're overlooking the fact that one ship is seeing the other ship 120 miles away, bro. What? Oh my God! I'll shut up. Okay.
It's because I kind of agree with the point that Sofa keeps making in the thing, still wasting time on optic observations. I think what it sounds like we all agree on. I keep trying to, the whole purpose of doing this, trying to sort of work on how to have discussions where people disagree. And I think one of the better places to start is, where do we agree? And it seems we agree that refraction is an effect that can bend light and make observations, particularly observations at a distance on a warm day, unreliable, and we shouldn't trust them.
Close to the ground.
And close to the ground. And then and I'm happy to accept all of that. In fact, I think that is the case. Then the counter question becomes, then why does Flat Earth keep doing observations at a distance over water close to the ground? Why would we? Because this is the most common argument. This black swan bub-eye ball that QE introduced to everybody is the most common one. FE core is the other one I've heard, shooting lasers across a lake. The one that was in the Behind the Curve documentary is shooting lasers across a lake. Almost all of them are observations at a distance over water, where we all seem to accept there can be refraction that makes those observations at a distance unreliable. That, I even hear people in the Flat Earth community say, horizon is optical, not physical. I'm like, great, so what are you measuring there? You're measuring optics. We're measuring stuff that we are all in this room accepting we don't trust. So do people here throw out that fucking stop pointing at things, Harry. Do we throw out that black swan observation and go, well, there's no point wasting our time with optical observations if we accept that there is fallibility to them?
No, we don't throw it out, because we point out the horizon is 15 miles farther than the actual horizon geometrically that it's supposed to be. The fact that you are seeing something that you should not be seeing, and that's the point. That is the argument.
Okay, so let me simplify it, because I thought I'd handled that, but let me do it here. Here, I can see that strut, right? If we just look at that strut, and I can see that horizon there. Here, I can see the horizon there, and there is no strut. So in both of these pictures, you are getting something. That strut, the point of me pointing out that strut is in front of the horizon. What you're saying is refraction could not pick that up and show that like that, with something else obstructing something that's behind it. But then my question would be, isn't that exactly what we are seeing here, which is something that isn't, your argument is that's not there, this isn't a refractive effect.
The Rayleigh criterion. As things go off into the distance, they converge with the horizon. So the fact that you're not seeing that strut is due to that fact of the Rayleigh criterion.
That is is it your position that second oil platform is converging with the horizon? That doesn't look to me what I'm seeing at all. Converging with the horizon, I imagine, is it gets so small and difficult to resolve that it converges with the horizon. That looks quite big and observably
I'm talking about the lower portion of that section. So the first oil platform is elevated, whereas the second platform is not elevated due to what I've just shared with you.
Right, so that appears to be going down. That's fine. Where are its legs? Because they're not converging with the horizon. They are in that photo clearly behind it when they're not here. So all I'm saying is exactly the effects that we are saying make this first one impossible, make the second one impossible too. We either have to go, actually, maybe refraction can bend and show light around things, which is what this one's claim. What it sounds like you guys are claiming in this one. This has in some way bent the water up and the background down to make it appear a globe, where water here is obscuring the legs. I'm making that an absolute mess. Whereas what you're saying is incompatible in the second one is that the legs are here and they are clearly obscuring the horizon behind it. So it's the same effect both times. Why would it be acceptable in one case to go, we can trust this because of the order in which we see things in front of one another, occluding one another, Therefore, that is definitely not refraction. Refraction doesn't explain this. And then the next one where we are again seeing something including something else, we go, well, that's got to be refraction. I don't understand how we rationally are picking one from the other.
No. I agree with both pictures being affected optically, but the fact that we're seeing a horizon 15 miles out or even further, it is the nail in the coffin for my belief personally, because we shouldn't be seeing that. There should be a ball and it's going over the ball and where you cannot see through water.
Yeah, so to clarify, that's not the position that people say when they're talking about looming. That's a mischaracterization of what looming is. This accurately describes what I believe looming to be. I think it is probably the case, is the way I would try to put that. Which is
part where the sky is reflected on the sea, so you can't. It looks like it's up in the sky, but no.
Well, so that superior mirage would be if it's floating. Looming to me would go, if the boat's there, I'm still going to see the boat on the water, because a mirage is the one where it appears to float. It's just that I'm going to get that exactly this same bent light effect that we're using just because it's looking at the boat. Oh my God, Harry. Doesn't mean that it's just that refractive effect of bending light is stopping because it's recognized the difference between boat and ocean. My understanding of it is everything, same as what is really there is bent, what is really there is bent, what is really there is bent. So what you'll effectively get is an ocean like that. But it will be so subtle that it will look exactly like the black swan. That's at least what looming is describing. It's not describing what I think you're saying, which is there is a hump of ocean in the way and the light waves are shooting through the ocean and then picking it up there. It's that it is bending over the curvature of Earth. And that bending effect, because we're expecting to see something straight, makes it appear up here.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that the picture you have is on a flat plane.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which makes it our reality. And then, yes, you have all these optical effects within it. But when they start incorporating, these effects are due because it's pulling up an object behind the ball that we should necessarily not be seeing because it's behind a geometric curve on the other side of the hill, if you will. And that's when it starts getting into Narnia. And now we're making up things. Other than just saying, no, it's still flat, but we're seeing these effects upon these different objects in the ocean based on the optic illusion, whether it be refraction, looming, super looming, superior, and mirage, all these different terms. They're still being used on a flat ocean. And well, of course there's waves and swells, but it's still, it's as flat.
It just seems to me that, I guess the point I'm getting at is, if we accept that there are these effects, I would either control for them or stop using that method. I would figure out a way to control for refraction, which sounds to me like military when they're shooting shells for a great distance do. And if I wasn't able to control for refraction, I would stop using those methods and use another method to measure. Could be curvature, it could be rotation, it could be explaining the southern star trails. I would go to a different topic, because the suggestion is from the ballers side anyway, is yes, we do see too far. That absolutely I would happily concede, particularly on warm days, we see too far. That is a really robust assertion that the flat earth makes, which I'm happy to concede.
Can you pull up a side for me? Observations at night over lakes, over water, cool water, usually sometimes frozen, of just lights. You get a bright light and you have one person stand on the shore and you can see that light from the other shore.
Sure.
And so there's tons of those observations.
So light, wouldn't we agree that light at a distance is the same thing as observations at a distance? Because what it's requiring is, what it's making an assumption of is straight light rays.
You're controlling for the refraction by doing it with cool temperatures.
No, you're not.
Yeah, for instance, I think a good observation is seeing Chicago skyline from Michigan. That's 55 miles or something like that. Again, this is another one of those things where, wait. Geometric horizon, 4 miles. Let's even give them the benefit of the doubt. It's freaking 15 miles now. But now we're seeing 55 miles. Like, wake up. What has to happen for you to be like, okay, yeah, maybe it isn't a curve and it has to be on a flat surface?
That's exactly what I'm getting at. Something other than just observations at a distance. If it fit with a body of other evidence. So if we went, hey, Harry, here's this thing. We can make observations at a distance and they go beyond what we would expect from a geometric curve for a horizon. I'd be like, okay, interesting. On the other side, though, I've got this wealth of evidence and indeed a sort of presupposed idea, a kind of bias, if you would, towards the heliocentric model that I was told. Indeed, as I've said to other people in other rooms, my dad died pretty recently and he was a pretty well-known and adventurous aviator, sort of flew in air races
sorry
and
to
stuff.
hear that.
That's okay. I didn't bring it up for a sort of pity party, just that like some of the other biases I have are that he navigated across what I think to be a globe and used a sextant to do so, and he reliably told me that just doesn't make sense on a flat plane. It's not possible to navigate using the stars if there isn't a south celestial pole. So there's a lot of stuff on that side, right? Some of which is biases and probably bad thinking, possibly bad thinking. So then I would go, right, if we're going to just use observations at a distance and there is a ready challenge to that, there is a thing that needs to be controlled for, why not go to other places? Like that's what I think was great about Bob Nodell's experiment, where he's like, well, let's look for rotation. I think the challenge being, it looks like he found it.
Yeah, so I pulled that picture. I sent that picture in a chat for Apple to kind of reiterate how the horizon works.
He always calls me Apple. It's Apocryphon, but it's okay. Don't call me Apple.
Prufo.
My name gets butchered the most on this server.
I would have said I've gone from Apocryphon.
What'd you say?
Okay.
I would have said Apocryphon. Yeah, it's Angel is Apocryphon. Who's Apocryphon? What's Apocryphon? No, that's that's the books that were considered not a part of the canon, the Bible.
Yeah, they're the secret writings, if you will. The knowledge of secrets.
So the knowledge of secrets, this is kind of a bit of a left turn, but yeah, we were talking about that the other day because I was like, I do like a conspiracy theory, and I can easily believe that a small group of people can set out to deceive a large group of people and be successful some of the time. What I wonder about the Apocryphon is, what if it went the other way around? What if the real hoax was a small group of priests deciding what books go in the Bible because they affirm a flat earth view, and they are deliberately hiding from, early Christians, the shape of the earth because it gave them more control over them, made them less likely to travel, made less likely to question authority. And that to me seems a much more believable conspiracy, because in that day and age there wasn't space flight, there wasn't plane flight, we didn't even have binoculars as far as I know, or ways to pull things at a great distance back into view. So it would be a much easier time, regardless of the shape of the planet, it would be a much easier time to deceive people about the shape of the planet. And
well, it's
as I mentioned,
Enoch, on the contrary of that, they actually are the ones that came up with the heliocentric model, the priests of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
On the contrary of that, and how easy was it for them to deceive everybody? Very.
Because clerics had the means to do research.
Go ahead, Farming. You were trying to say something.
The Book of Enoch actually has a model of how the seasons work, how the sun progresses in the sky, how the eclipses work. That's all discussed in Enoch.
So
yeah, there's a lot of scriptures that clearly are the earth is unmovable and it was put upon pillars and all these literal things. Yeah, I mean, we could go down those roads. And even in the Apocryphas, they also mentioned the earth and the way it's built. And so why did they take those out? Well, because it didn't go along with their heliocentric model. And that's what the conspiracy is.
Mm-hmm.
Because it went against that the sun is the center and we're revolving around it. Even though the scriptures themselves are clearly stating the opposite. But It's okay.
So
Once
for
again,
for you, Apocryphon, and anybody else here who would say they're a globe skeptic or they don't believe the heliocentric model, if you found scripture that you read and you went, this is at odds with the flat Earth. This clearly, like, you know, I'm saying, like, how could I say it without it sounding too crazily improbable? Like, just imagine there was a book in the Bible that nobody had brought up to you yet, that you hadn't glanced at for 15, 20 years. And when you read it, it said, the Earth that you live on is a sphere that rotates once a day and orbits a large hot body once a year. And you went, wow, there's no two ways about it. And you even dug into the sort of Greek or you know, earlier texts and went, goodness, it really does say that. It's using the words for sphere. Would you at that stage go, I think that the scriptures are wrong? Or at that stage you go, I think I need to go back and do some more tests?
Well, actually, to kind of help out the Globers, in the year 1500, they actually changed the translation and they started putting globe. Whenever it said circle, they translated and they put globe. So yes, they had an agenda to push. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And they started using globe, even though they always made in the original text before the translations, it was circle, circle this, circle that. They knew what the difference between a ball and a circle was because they make mention of ball in it. But why didn't they use sphere? But all of a sudden in 1500, it just so happens to be when they started pushing the heliocentric model, they changed the scripture to say globe.
Sure.
So
that looks a bit fishy. Yeah. So what about, let me ask it a different way then. That's useful information. What about if that was the other way around? What about if when you found the old original text, you went, hang on, they've translated here and they've made it flat in the modern text, but if I look to the old text, they clearly use the word sphere. Would that make you more inclined to, like, what would you then do? If you found scripture was at conflict with flat Earth, which one do you think would be more likely to give?
Then my belief would be turned upside down, because then it would negate all the other scriptures that state and speak of a flat, unmovable, Earth. And it's interesting because someone pointed out earlier, Earth is the land. It's in Genesis. Earth is not all encompassing. There's the seas and there's Earth. It's two different things. So when we say Earth is a ball, well, wait, Earth is the land, and the waters were known as the seas. I mean, in scripturally speaking. But you're right. That came out, like all the old scriptures were talking about a sphere and this. Well, then that would definitely change my personal belief, because my whole belief stems from the scriptures. Maybe someone don't like to hear that, but ultimately that's what it's coming from.
Yeah. So that's it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's the other one that we were posing the other day with somebody else with, like, what if it was huge? Like, what if we said, because I think the other thing that could resolve a lot of flat Earth evidence would be to say it could still be a globe, just far bigger than we were told.
I'm actually not against that, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I would say this: as far as we can see visibly, and we see these phenomenons, I would say, okay, it's flat. But you're right. What if it is ice wall encompassing this land? But what about, like, what if it goes a billion miles out beyond that? We don't know. But we have this CGI fake. Here's a picture from space. Here's our satellites, and here's from Jupiter, and all this nonsense, this cartoons that states otherwise. But that's all made up. But you're right. I don't know the shape of it, but I'll tell you what we're looking at, in real life, in reality, not some mathematical equation, not some CGI cartoon. And that's the difference. So you're right. It could be a ball. It could be a ball a million times bigger than what our Earth actually is. But there's still a sun moon on its circuit, circling the plane that we have known to call Earth. I'm just saying.
Sure. And it's a very interesting point you make, and I think good on you for saying that too, because a lot of other people, when they're like, "Oh, you're just so in love with your ball," we prove it's not the ball you say, and you just make up another ball. And I'm like, that's not quite what I'm testing. What I'm more interested is going going, how could you be right and still get a different answer? And I think that's exactly right, which is we might reach limits of our
problem with that is once you change the radius value, then sort of all of your mathematics for orbital mechanics, for you're describing all these other
Yeah,
things
that's still all fake.
are dependent on that value.
Sure, that's though the point that I was agreeing with Apocryphon is you can still say space is fake. You can still have a Freemason or Jesuit conspiracy. You could still have an ice wall. You could still have everything that currently exists in the flat Earth
maybe the dome
ecosystem. The dome would be, but I mean, the dome should be in question anyway. That is the one for me where I'm like, I could logically get on board with a lot of things inside the flat Earth thing, but the dome does cause me a lot of problems, which is like, it causes many flat Earthers to break their own rules. Their flat Earthers rules are great rules, which is like, check it for yourself. Don't just trust somebody else. Don't just take it as an assumption. And then the dome, we go, we assume it based on reasoning from first principles. I'm like, well, hang on, what happened to that really great rule you used to have about testing things?
Let me tell you about a little argument that I got in with one of my cousins.
Go on.
And he was like, well, how do you know if we cannot go, way beyond Antarctica and map this all out? How do you know? And then I had like a little idea. I said, well, wait, what if there's like a bunch of bubbles, right? Like little domed planets, or domed environments. Like imagine how vast in distance the lands are when you get in a plane and you fly. Imagine what if there's like 50 of these type of domed type of worlds on this humongous, huge flat or ball, square, triangle, whatever. But what if there's a bunch of them? No different than like, have you ever had like packaging those where you pop the bubbles?
Yes.
There's like 100.
Yeah, bubble wrap.
Yeah. What if there's a bunch of worlds like that on a flat plane as far as what you can see? But then, what if way beyond? What if it's a trapezoid? I don't know. I don't know. We don't know. But with that idea in mind, what if there's like 50 domed Earths, and then we're like, there's aliens, but they're just coming from beyond another one of these realms. I don't know. Whatever. I'm just.
No, I think it's an interesting idea and not impossible to me. I don't think I'd go probable, but yeah, it's worth exploring and wondering about. Except that would be in contradiction to Scripture, wouldn't it? Because I thought there is a passage. I'm not so crash hot on my Bible stuff, but I thought it was God created life on Earth and nowhere else. I thought there was some bit where it was explicitly said that there was no life outside of our realm.
Actually, no. It says that the spirit was hovering above the oceans deep, and he said, "Let there be light," and then there was light. It doesn't ever say that there's not other places. Okay. There is one Earth. There is one of us. Let's say we call this Earth Project A. It's just never talked about Project B. I'm just saying we don't know.
It reminds me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Has anybody seen that or read that? It's way better as a book.
A good movie.
It's
a really good movie.
The book is really funny. If you like he just writes really well. So like the sort of taking the piss out of bureaucracy and bad government and stuff like that, and just it's a very funny thing. But yeah, the whole premise of it is like, we just did this because we wanted to solve this mathematical problem, non-mathematical problem, this meaning of life thing. So we created a whole planet just to solve that. I think that's a very funny concept.
Yeah, Douglas Adams was a genius,
wasn't he? Wow, goodness, we miss him. I mean, we as humanity should miss him. So.
Another point I want to bring up, and we don't really talk about it, but we don't really is sunspots.
Okay.
There's pictures showing the sunspot and the rays of which the light is, coming off the sun at certain times of the year and certain days and certain temperatures, and it can't work on a ball with a sun 93 million miles away. Because in reality, if you try to recreate that, you'll never get that hot spot by a light placed super far away from the object. You could only
Why
get that
not?
sunspot if that's just the way the light works. That's just
Really? Okay. How did you
Well,
determine
Marty,
that?
for example, so we have observations, right, where people have put balloons up, and the balloons are up high above the cloud line, and then what you see is a hot spot from the sun. So you see an area that's being lit heavily by the sun, and then you see that that the lighting falls off away from that, and it's generally like a really small area. What he's saying is if the sun was 93 million miles away, you wouldn't get a hot spot like that.
Exactly. You just got to think of it logically, Marty.
What kind of nonsense? It's a reflection.
Okay.
Like you do know that total reflection on water, like it's mainly water. What this is observed on, right? That this reflection, the total reflection angle, is only a small range. Like there's only a specific angle at which total reflection occurs on water, and below that it's not total reflection, and above that there's not total reflection. So it is reasonable to, get a highlight at the certain angle, at the certain distance, observing distance, where the angle is just right between surface that you're observing and observer.
Well,
right?
Somebody got a photo of these sunspots so I can put them up on my thing so I know what we're talking about.
The only way you can get that sunspot is when you're high enough to see its effect from a sun that is closer in our atmosphere, in our realm, in our dome, whatever you want to call it, in the firmament, I will say.
So
when you were standing on the beach, when there's the difference between reflection and hotspot is this: when you're standing on the beach and the sun is from the horizon all the way to the shore, you cannot get that on a ball, but you can get it on a table, on something flat, and that's just more proof and evidence.
You can get that on a ball. I replicated it over a curved surface. It's not a problem. The reason being that this streak of sunlight that you're getting at some sunsets, right, where you have a beautiful streak of light reaching all the way to your feet, right, that's caused by the ripples in the ripples in the water. So the ripples in the water, they reflect the lights, that they have a total reflection in every possible direction. Like when you advance a little bit along the ripple, then it reflects in a different direction, right? And so the reflection, there's also always a part of a ripple that reflects into the direction of the observer, and that's how the streak forms, right? There's nothing that would prevent this on a curved surface. The height at which this would happen is different for a curved surface and a flat surface, right? At the height at which the ripples have just the right ratio to the observer height, right? But it happens on both a curved surface and a flat surface. I've replicated it with a piece of tinfoil, just crumpled it up a little bit, and a candle. It's very easy.
Yeah, but again,
so I want to try and understand both of these positions. It sounds like what you're saying, Morty, is that when they're talking about those sunspot effects, and what they're talking about with the sunspot is this, which appears to show, hey, the sun's just right above this bit, not giant and shining down on every bit. And is it what you're saying, that what you're saying is just like a small patch of what this might be, which is a sun beam, I guess, is bouncing along the water?
Yeah, I mean, in this particular observation, it looks more like the clouds are less dense at that spot, right? But there are other examples where there's a clear highlight over what appears to be the ocean or something, right? So there are examples where you get a glare like that. Yes.
Sure. One of the things I think, though, and as feedback to us on the Globers side, is I think a strong answer that we could give more often is, I don't know. Because I think that, like, when it talks about that sunspot, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And it could be that they're right. I don't think that it is, because some of what I think about the globe side is that people go, well, explain this. And we feel compelled to, and then we do. And it gets to the point where it's like, where I hear a lot of Globers even say, how could you know that? And I think what would be acceptable, because I get the point you made here was really well done. Although, and I'm not saying don't say it, I would just go, I'd guess at that this might be an explanation. Because for a few things, one, I wonder if it would be more effective. Like for the flat earthers in the room, do you think it would be more effective if us Globers, so to speak, were more like, I don't know, and talked in terms of what we think might be the case rather than sort of speaking with certainty?
I would
Give you
think
an
that would.
example. Kosho was asked the other day on Brandon's show about what would happen if you took water and you put it outside of the International Space Station. Like, would it freeze? Would it boil? Like what would happen? Would the temperature go up? Would the temperature go down?
Yeah.
And rather than just giving the answer like, I don't know, like he tap danced around it for 45 minutes and, you could just tell like he didn't have a good answer. And so rather than trying to convince people, I think a lot of times people from both sides try to shoot from the hip and, make explanations for things that they don't really understand.
Yeah. And I think it's understandable, because to just go, I don't know, feels like a weak position. To me, it's a really strong one, where I then, am not held to prove anything, and I can postulate or sort of weigh mutually exclusive possibilities. So I could go, it's a area of low density cloud, because the moment you said it, I was like, oh yeah, it could be. Or sort of higher altitude cloud or something like that is getting this ripple effect because it's sort of bouncing at a different height, whereas if I went down, that would go dark. And then I could go, it's also possible that, and sort of pick a different thing and weigh a few at the same time without feeling like, because I think that sometimes might lose its credibility and somewhat crush the argument, crush the discussion.
Yeah, if you don't know, then you should be intellectually honest and say that you don't know something. That's okay.
Yeah.
Though the water on the ISS thing is actually a pretty interesting proposition.
This question was stupid. It served no purpose other than Brian had to shout it. That's all.
Say again, Chike, sorry?
That question, what would happen to the water if you put them in a thermos and took them to the ISS, served no purpose.
Well, the discussion was about the thermosphere,
I don't know.
right?
There's not enough information. I don't know what the thermos is made of.
Yeah.
How much heat it gets and how much it dissipates. I don't know. How would I answer such a question?
Yeah.
What's the purpose of it?
And that's what I think is a great answer. I don't know because I don't have enough data, and I imagine even if I personally had enough data, I'd still be like, I don't fucking know.
I was thinking more like if you like take a bag of water and like some small droplets of water and just performed an EVA and just sprayed some water, what would happen to that water?
Because I imagine they would be imparted with some kind of initial vector, like they would start traveling in some sort of direction. And so I guess probably keep slinging
does
out
it boil before it freezes? Does it freeze before it boils? Does it depend on how much water it is?
Because I thought with low pressure, it should just immediately turn into vapor, doesn't it? Wouldn't it?
Well, according to the movie Gravity, it freezes. They get this frost.
Well, the movies are not always accurate, right?
According to the movie Gravity.
The thing that I'm reminded of is that you can degas water, and that's like one of the way that you can like mix water with oil. Actually,
what's
you can just put it. That's called degassing. Right? When you try like water binds an amount of gas, of air, of CO2, right? Like we all are familiar with soda and fuzzy drinks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is on a lower scale. This is like always happening in normal water, right? This is how fish survive, right?
Okay.
So when you want this gas out of the water, you can just put a bowl or a glass of it into a vacuum chamber, and just suck all the air out of it. Like with all the air in the chamber, the air also goes out of the water and into the chamber and gets sucked out with all the rest of the air. Right, and when you do that, I think it was another YouTube channel that showed us. Then you can actually mix water and oil together, Like they actually combine together into one fluid when you degas water.
Really?
Yeah.
So there's something to do with the gas in the water normally that means that the oil and water separate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, don't let me say anything stupid. If I remember correctly, the oil is hydrophobic. Yeah, the oil is hydrophobic and lipid, so it likes the other oil, it likes the other fat, and it doesn't like the water, right? And when you have a hydrophobic substance and you submerge it into water, then what actually happens on a microscopic scale is that a teeny tiny layer of air, of gas or air forms around the hydrophobic liquid because, or the hydrophobic substance, because it's hydrophobic. It doesn't like the water. It repels it. So there's some space for other stuff to be in between the water and the liquid or the substance.
Ah, I see. So it's sort of pushing it out, and it gets to that, which ends up being the barrier. I see.
Yeah, and the barrier that, like for liquid, for hydrophobic liquid, basically the only way to get that barrier away is like get rid of all the gas, right? And for our hydrophobic substances, you can just like kind of pop the bubbles sometimes, and it will yeah, for example, cinnamon is slightly hydrophobic. So if you dip a spoon of cinnamon into water carefully, or into milk, then it will form a bubble around it, right? And then you pop that bubble, and it dissolves.
Interesting. So this has made me think about, like, if we were to go agnostic about what we were talking about, so it could be about separation of water and gas and degassing water, and then to sort of go back a step to explain sun rays or sunspots, but it could equally be to determine if someone's lying to us. What would we all agree on would be a good method of determining, of sorting fact from fiction? What sort of skills would we use?
I always go to the consistency. Does the story stay the same, or does the story have to change? And that's a red flag for me when the story has to change, when people have to take positions that go against what their original position was. That's a red flag.
Okay.
That's interesting, though, because historically, like, the amount of information that is gonna be available to you just because of technological advancement is gonna grow. Therefore, there is a high possibility that you're gonna make a case, like make a story or make sense of something, and that's not gonna be entirely true, entirely consistent from the get-go. As you gain more information, you're gonna see there's more to it.
I'll give you an example, Morty, right? 5 years ago, the geometric horizon was a physical object, right? You could draw lines to it to measure the tangent, right? The boats disappeared behind it. And now your guys' position is the geometric horizon is an optical effect, and you can't actually see the geometric horizon. That's a simple example.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a
good.
Not
what happened. Right?
I think that would be a good. I think it's an interesting method to start talking about, because I think that there is good sense on both sides of what it sounds like you're saying. Where you're saying if the story changes, it's a little bit like police go up and talk to somebody and they go, "Where were you last Thursday?" And you go, "I was at the pub with my mate Gary." And then they do more investigation. They come back and they go, "Where were you last whenever?" I said. And they go, "Oh, I was at home by myself." And you go, that's what you're saying, I think, isn't it? Isn't it farming? Which is like, there's something a bit sus about our story changing. And then it sounds on the other side, Morty, you're saying is, if our methods for determining truth are getting better, then a story changing would actually be a higher indicator of. So how could we slice between these two? If the story is changing, which I think we both agree. Well, how would you put it? Sorry, you didn't say the story changing would be would add credibility to it. So how would you put it about whether a story changes, Morty?
Me. Well, you will have to look at the evidence for it. Right.
For the
And
change,
I
you
think
mean?
one thing that's important to point out with farming's example is actually that this is not what happened. Like, this is a straw man of the actual story that happened, because what's actually being claimed all the time has been the horizon as it is understood, as it more closely understood now in the discussion.
Sure, but
And
I don't want to
when
get
this
stuck. I
whole
don't want to
thing
get stuck
came
on this
up,
on the content of it, because I think we're all going to disagree on the content of it. Whereas the structure of how do we determine what's right or wrong, we might have similar methods for, and so otherwise we're going to get stuck in a when did they start saying it was a geometric horizon. Whereas I think what we're saying here is farming saying consistency. Does the story say the same or change? When the story changes, that's a red flag. And you're saying, well, I want to look at the evidence for the change. So tell me about that. What would you be looking for in the evidence for the change? What kind
that's
of
a really tough thing to broaden out that way.
Because some of what I might...
I mean, I could specify what evidence means in that context, right?
Sure, yeah.
That would be determined via scientific means, mainly via experimentation and testing, right? That would be sufficient for evidence.
Sure.
There is some value to theoretical deduction, right? But if the theoretical deduction is purely mathematical and there's no experimental verification of it yet, then yeah, that's to be taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah, excellent. And
So
I think
this might not fit with your worldview, but another thing is I'm more skeptical of sources that are pushed by like the corporate media,
sure,
by governments, by so kind of the ideas that are most mainstream, I sort of give the most scrutiny to, because in my experience, I've seen the governments lie, I've seen the corporate media lie, that's been my experience of worldview. So
sure,
I tend to more heavily weigh people that don't really have much to gain when they have a position. So I think that's why a lot of times in science, you see scientists from fields that aren't their own are the ones who can actually offer the best criticisms of those fields.
That's so interesting, because that's exactly the opposite to what I say about scientists, where I'm like, oh, you can watch a scientist kill their career when they start making observations or sort of assertions outside their field. But I think we'd probably then get into the weeds on those, because I suspect some of the ones I'm like, that's silly. You would be like, no, those are the ones I believe. So something about being more skeptical. Go on.
Well, check out the Sky Scholar. He's Pierre Marie Robitaille. He's people just scoff and just say, well, he's just a radiologist, but he invented the most powerful MRI machine in the world. And so he
he's
knows
a creationist,
about,
isn't he?
I don't know that I've never professed religion so much. I've discovered him through the Electric Universe people.
Right.
And so
that's his thing.
He actually ran an ad, like I think in 2002 or something, in the New York Times. He took out a full page ad to say, to question the Big Bang. And so he attacks a lot of the ideas of astronomy. And so, like I said, because he's outside of the field, I think that, he's able to say things that he wouldn't be able to if he were actually in the field.
Right.
But he's written lots of peer-reviewed papers. When you talk to him, he's all about references and data, and and usually when people attack him, it's just basically hand waving and ad homs at what he says.
Sure.
I'll put a link in the chat.
I think something else we might both agree on is how, like, because the question is sort of how to weigh something, is which you've already mentioned there, Morty, is something about testing. So test it for yourself or something. Would we agree with that? if that's available to you as an option.
Would be synthetic, and
would be
with
which? Sorry, I
regards to
haven't
the
heard
complexity of today's world, it's unreasonable. It's not feasible to test everything yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that.
At the scale we're talking here about, like what we're turning our distrust and our skepticism towards is the community that we would rely on for those tests itself. So there's pretty much no other way than the synthetic method at this point.
Which method? Say that again. Synthetic.
It's a synthetic, like ZETHETIC. It's basically the doctrine that nothing can be really known unless you have personally verified it.
Right. Yeah. Yes. To clarify, I'm not leaning that far. I'm just going. So I'd agree with all of what you said. I just say if it's available to me, that's certainly one way I'd go. So if something's in doubt and it is available to me, it is feasible for me to go and test something for myself. Like, go outside, sit down, mount a camera and record the Southern Cross rotating in a circular fashion in the sky. And I go, right, I can test that and then compare it to these models. That to me would be a way of doing it. But yeah, I'm not suggesting rely only on that, because I think that would be sort of get to that sort of level of extremism where, nothing's true.
I would give a warning about Pierre-Marie Robitaille. He's very technical, and so it's a lot of it's really thick. I mean, he's not. It's the opposite of like.
Not easy reading.
It's not easy reading. Yes.
Sure.
Or not even easy viewing. His explanations. He's very, very in the weeds, very in the details.
So. I'm going to put one here that is essentially steelman the opposition. It's not essentially, that's exactly the words I'm writing. Which is sort of based on that. Was it Oscar Wilde? Somebody had this thing about he who knows only his own side of the argument only knows little of that. That thing of like, if I want to make a case for, somebody did this the other day on one of the other servers. They were sort of mad incel black pill type kid who was like talking about how men get charged with sex crimes and the evidence isn't great. And then when I was like, what's your example for that? He brought up a case and started trotting out facts about it. And I was like, right, but what did the prosecution say? You just keep telling me what the defense lawyer said. Every time I Google something you said, it's claimed his defense lawyers. What about the other side? Where he was sort of missing, totally unaware of, or I was asking him like, what did the prosecution say in response to that? He was totally unaware of it. So being unable to steelman the opposition to me is one of the indications that I might be wrong. If I don't fully understand or cannot express to them their views as they might say them, I go, well, it's probably not a very good method.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead, Morty.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing, right? I mean, I was immediately seeing some parallels in context of how I see flat earthers commonly behave versus people that are not globe skeptics, right? But
well, I see people make this mistake on both sides, where I see people go, I understand what the other side is saying, and they're just, and they will sort of present the flimsiest, silliest case of the other side and then argue against that. But I think I see that almost as much on the globes. I think I almost see it more on the globe side, since there are just numerically more globers than I see on the flat earth side. Whereas a lot of flat earthers proudly claim, I understand your model better than you.
Virtually
I see there, I mean, there's a lot of antagonism from globe side of obviously that's where a lot of that mocking tone comes from. But when we're casting that aside, when we're casting all the people from both sides aside that are not constructively taking place in a discussion or debate, right? Then we're left with from the globe side, what I see happening more often in that case would be when something is misrepresented or not Steelman, is a genuine lack of familiarity, right? For example, the whole community was turning a blind eye to the whole movement of there are people that believe that are globe skeptics, right? For very long, they just did an article like 1 or 2 years ago, and it was like very superficial. I've been spending a couple of months, or maybe even tens of months, in the community by then, and I knew much more about the different streams and how this movement works than what the article describes. Like the article was much more superficial about flat Earth as a movement than what I had experienced already.
Interesting.
And virtually every flat earther, right, was a globie at one time.
Yeah.
Sometimes even passionate globies.
So I would agree with that. I would say that's agreeing with that side. Whereas when I say steelman the other side, I don't just mean sort of be on their side. I mean you can steelman it without being on that side, but sort of understand it deeply and present the best case. Where I think that might be the case for some flat earthers, but for many that I've talked to, they will say that, but then soon after that will say things like, I didn't know any of this stuff until I became a flat earther. I hadn't ever really looked into it deeply until I became a flat earther. And then I realized how weak the story is, which isn't what I'm talking about with a steelman. Whereas for a steelman, it would be like I could present the black swan. I'm pretty confident I could present the black swan in a way that would be doing justice, that many flat earthers, if I was in a room unspotted, I think I could get flat earthers to go, yeah, awesome, well explained. And that's different to going, I've seen that before.
Now, also, if they learn about it after realizing the globe is fake or not, does not necessarily inhibit the ability to steelman it, right? It's just that you have to make the best possible case for the argument of the position, and that's certainly not happening from the flat earth side, because a lot of the times disproofs are pointed out, right? And then you will get a rebuttal to that where things are being said like, no, that's not the actual claim that's being made, and no, that's not how it's claimed to work, and these rebuttals are not incorporated.
Yes. Yeah. So if somebody goes, that's not what the model says, and then they continue with that argument, that to me is indicative that that person is probably not right. And also, interestingly to me, it somewhat hints they don't want to be more right. Because if you're presenting a disproof of the other side, you need to understand that side. And if you're going, well, this is ridiculous because X, and you go, well, that's X is not the case, and then they carry on with their proof, it's like, to me, my feeling is if you were taking this seriously and trying to determine truth rather than just trying to present your case, you would have stopped at that point and gone, oh, is that not the case? Okay, tell me what is, so I can get X right, so I can go back to building my conclusion. Because some of it is as well, I think, here when we're trying to determine the method for determining truth, go back to that question of the Bible, which would be, I imagine, I don't mean for the flat earthers here necessarily, but for many flat earthers, one of those questions would be, is this compatible with Scripture? Would be one of those questions. Well, that killed the room.
Did it help? How many times you had to correct the apocryphon today and tell him that no, it's not what we say. We look through atmosphere. We have refraction. So, no. For you, you look through to geometric horizon, and his horizon is created by either the Rayleigh criteria or can have some blooming or sinking stuff like that.
I have a hot take.
Go on.
well, what my thoughts are escaping me. What was it? Oh yeah. Again, we were talking about how to determine truth, how to get closer to it, which
Yeah.
methods to deploy. Well, another thing to look at is there doubt? If there's no doubt whatsoever to any story or any complex thing with nuances, then it is an indicator that somebody is just telling you what they want you to believe.
Yes. Yeah. So I thought you were going the other way with it. I was going to be like, we're going to have words now, Marty. But yeah, absolutely for me, which is again some of the criticism I keep laying against people on the globe side, where they're like, we know that the sun is 93 million miles away, and I'm like, no, you don't. You've made a lot of guesses and have narrowed the bandwidth to a certain point. But if you get to that point of saying we absolutely know it, you are just becoming a zealot. Whereas to say, we think it based on these things, based on these assumptions, which could be challenged or tested, based on these tests, which could have been done in flawed methods with flawed assumptions, So we think our best guess is that the sun is a ball, exploding ball of hydrogen 93 million miles away. Whereas if we say it absolutely has to be this thing, that to me is a symptomatic that I'm not going to question this. I'm not going to challenge this. I will not contend the other side, which is why I was asking the question before about scripture, because scripture doesn't, to me, leave room for doubt. It dictates the world's got to be a certain way.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, especially with regards to the specific globe versus not globe and the evidence, or what is there we can really determine about our observable reality, because the factual things we can go back to on this regard is physics, right? And if you really are serious about breaking it down to the most fundamental level of, okay, what am I basing my reality on, and what assumption am I taking, then you really get another sense to what all the implications are to challenging something, and how which implications, which assumptions you're actually making in your daily life. Because there are relatively few, surprisingly.
Relatively few assumptions?
Yeah.
See, it's so interesting. I would have gone totally the opposite way with that, where I go, because I'm a sort of extremist for the I don't know view. All I can do is think things. And so I go, a lot of my life is assumptions that my car's going to start. Or have I misunderstood what you mean by assumptions?
Yeah, I think you misunderstood. Like, I mean the fundamentals of what the whole rest of the worldview derives from, right? The physics of the rest of the worldview derives
from.
So
those base assumptions.
Yeah.
Right.
And the axioms that are taken are relatively few, but they're pretty like, we could flip the world around and we could make our understanding of the world completely different by just changing those base assumptions a little, or setting them at a different point and then deriving from there. And it would still result in the same results. We would still use forces, mass times acceleration, right? This wouldn't change, right? But it would derive from a different point.
I see, yeah. All right, I think I'm going to wrap up the stream here because it's been going for a while. It's been a very interesting chat. Thank you very much, particularly Morty, Farming, and Chike, and Astro, who was here before. A really nice chat, and it's really nice when we get to have the ballers and the flat earthers have a have a sort of reasonable exchange of ideas. So I thank you all for that. It's been a good chat. Any final thoughts from you all before I shut it down?
I want to shout out Farming Ninja because I've been noticing that his physical understanding, or his his ability to represent the opposition properly is definitely a cut above many, above most other people you would find, particularly on this server.
Thanks, Morty. I appreciate that. I enjoy talking with you always.
Thanks.
Awesome. Good stuff. Thanks all.